In the deep wilderness, the stakes are absolute: life or death. For generations, trappers, hunters, and pioneers brought the wild to heel. They could raise a shelter in minutes, lay trap lines to outlast merciless winters, and navigate hundreds of miles of uncharted territory with only instinct and experience as their compass. Today, amid our modern comforts, these skills have atrophied mainly, fading into history. But in the untamed wild, such proficiency was not a hobby, it was the currency of survival. This is an examination of the mountain men who carved an existence out of North America's most perilous frontier. A brief interlude before we proceed. If you find value in this series, I encourage you to like or subscribe. I'm often curious about the geography of this audience, so do note your city and local time in the comments. It is a strange dissonance to consider that while I record this in the quiet of an American night, some of you may be settling in for breakfast in London. Very well, let us return to the frontier. Rest assured, it will be a significant journey. But first, get comfortable. Seriously, settle in, adjust those pillows, and pull that blanket up, because considering where we are headed, you will want to be warm. The cold is the initial assault. It always is. It is a knife-edge chill that shears through whatever fitful sleep you have managed to salvage. Your eyes crack open to absolute darkness, pitch black so profound that you briefly question whether you have gone blind during the night. The rough wool of your bedroll scratches against your cheek, stiff with frost despite the meager protection of the pine boughs overhead. It is October 1831. The Rocky Mountains possess a profound indifference to the calendar. Winter arrives when it pleases at this altitude, and it is arriving now. You might wonder how men actually slept exposed to these temperatures. It is a fair question. The answer is simple: badly. They slept poorly. This bears no resemblance to a climate-controlled bedroom equipped with a memory foam mattress. Your body is wrecked from the previous day's 20-mile trek. Your muscles scream from the exertion of scaling ridges, fording streams, and breaking trail. Your hands are raw and cracked and fissured by the arid mountain air. The ground beneath you might as well be stone for a simple reason. It is stone, separated from your ribs by nothing more than a thin scattering of pine needles and a single wool blanket against the frozen earth. "James, you alive over there?" The voice rumbles from a few feet away, gravelly, eroded by years of high-country winters and excessive whiskey. It is old Bill, your reluctant mentor in this rugged existence, already stirring despite the ungodly hour. "Unfortunately," you croak in return, the sound foreign to your own ears after days of near total silence between you. "Sun's coming soon," Bill grunts. "Need to check those traps before some damn Wolverine beats us to it." An interesting note here: a historian once told me that mountain men were rarely talkative. When you endure weeks or months without human contact, the mechanics of conversation begin to dissolve. It makes the social anxiety of the modern world seem relatively tame by comparison. But back in the snow, the reality of your situation crawls back into your consciousness. You have been in the mountains for nearly 3 months now. A greenhorn, that is what Bill calls you. A city boy from St. Louis, a young man who mistook beaver trapping for high adventure, a romantic path to a Western fortune. God, what a fool you were. Yet you have learned. You had no choice. The mountains dispose of the unprepared before they can even shiver. Your stomach protests, a grim reminder that it has been 2 days since your last substantial meal, a stringy rabbit Bill snared and roasted over a miserable fire. You are hoarding the last of the pemmican for a true emergency. That is the cardinal rule of this place. Ration as if your survival hangs in the balance, because it absolutely does. You hear that? Bill's voice slices through your thoughts. You freeze, instantly alert, straining to hear the pre-dawn silence. At first, nothing. Then, the sharp report of a snapping twig. Something is moving through the timber surrounding your camp. "There," you whisper, your heart suddenly hammering a frantic rhythm against your ribs. Bill shakes his head, his eyes narrowing into slits. Too careful for bear. Then the air shifts.
A new scent arrives on the breeze. Smoke, wood smoke mingled with something, the unmistakable musk of other men. "Blackfeet," Bill whispers, the sound so faint it barely registers. A necessary footnote here. In 1831, the Blackfeet were not particularly hospitable to trappers infiltrating their lands. By not hospitable, I mean they were inclined to kill you and take your scalp. And not without cause. From their vantage point, trappers were merely thieves stealing resources. Your hand instinctively finds the rifle beside your bedroll, fingers curling around the cold steel. "Easy," Bill murmurs. "No need to die today." I know the impulse coursing through you. Open fire. But that is an efficient way to end your life immediately. Blackfeet warriors were not easily cowed by a lone gun against their superior numbers. Bill moves with deliberate slowness, reaching for his possibles bag, that leather pouch containing the miscellany of his survival. From it he withdraws a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Trade beads," he mouths silently. The sky is beginning to bleed gray, a pale light pushing back the obsidian dark. Through the timber you catch fugitive glimpses of movement, not one or two shapes, but many. "When they come," Bill whispers, "you let me talk. You don't touch that rifle unless I say. You understand?" You nod, your mouth too desiccated to articulate a response. The high country is unforgiving, but the people, native and newcomers alike, were the apex threat. Trust was as valuable as beaver pelts and twice as rare. This standoff, this is merely a Tuesday for a mountain man. It is the perpetual awareness that you are one misstep away from the grave, not just from predators or the crushing cold. However, those threats remain ever present, from other men who view you as either a threat or simply as a walking cache of supplies and resources they require far more urgently than they require your continued existence. You are suddenly, violently aware that your warm bed is not just thousands of miles away, but separated from you by the abyss of 190 years. The first warrior materializes in the clearing. He is tall, his visage a war mask of red and black pigment, a trade musket gripping his hands. Behind him, the timber gives up more of its ghosts. 7, 8, 9 men emerge, every one of them armed. Bill sits up with deliberate, agonizing slowness, keeping his hands conspicuously visible. His face registers neither fear nor anger, but rather the flat, impenetrable neutrality forged in decades of such standoffs. "Speak any English?" Bill asks, his voice steady as granite. The leader
Offers a reply. His dark eyes shift from Bill to you, then sweep over your meager camp, assessing, calculating, weighing the odds. "We got trade," Bill says, elevating the beads and gesturing toward the packs. "Tobacco, too." You scarcely dare to breathe, convinced that every thudding heartbeat marks your final countdown. Your rifle, once a comfort, now feels impossibly distant and laughably futile against such numbers. The warrior finally speaks, not to Bill, but to the men flanking him in a rapid, staccato flow of language you cannot decipher. "What is happening?" You mouth the question to Bill, but he offers no reply. His attention is locked on the silent exchange passing between the warriors. The lead brave steps forward, pointing first at your packs, then toward the nearby stream. "They want to know if we've seen Beaver sign," Bill murmurs, translating without taking his eyes off them, "asking if we're trapping this valley." And just like that, the dynamic shifts. You realize they aren't here to kill you, at least not yet. They are auditing their hunting grounds to ensure you aren't depleting the resources they depend on. "Tell them we just got here," you whisper, the words tumbling out. "Tell them we're passing through." Bill nods and shifts into a pidgin dialect of Blackfoot mixed with universal sign language. He points west, mimics the motion of travel, and displays his empty hands to signify that no traps have been set. The lead warrior considers this, weighing the truth of it, before speaking again. Bill's shoulders drop a fraction of an inch. "They're moving on, but they want the beads and some coffee." "That's it?" you ask, incredulous. "That's it," Bill confirms. The transaction is swift.
Bill hands over the beads and a small pouch of coffee grounds. The warriors accept the tribute without comment, and then, with ghost-like efficiency, melt back into the forest. You finally release a breath you didn't realize you were holding. Jesus Christ, you exhale, the sound shuddering out of you. I thought we were dead. Bill offers a short, rusty laugh, a sound unused to the open air. Day's young, still plenty of time for dying. Mountain men possessed a familiarity with mortality that modern sensibilities cannot grasp. Death wasn't a distant, sanitized concept. It was a daily neighbor, a visitor who might knock at any moment. "Let's get moving," Bill commands, already securing his bedroll. "Need to be at the river by midday." Just like that, you are packing up. The sun is barely breaching the mountains, painting the snow-dusted crags in gold and pink. In another life, you would call it beautiful. Here, it simply means you survived another night. That is the first lesson I learned while researching these men. Survival wasn't an exceptional circumstance, it was the daily condition. Every single day was strictly about making it to the next one. As you follow Bill down the slope toward the river valley, your mind drifts to the catalyst of this entire ordeal, the Beaver. Those flat-tailed, buck-toothed engineers of the waterways were worth their weight in gold back then, or rather their pelts were. A single prime beaver pelt could fetch $4 to $6 in 1831. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $120 to $180 today, all to feed the vanity of hat fashion back east. "Stop wool gathering," Bill grunts over his shoulder. "Watch where you're stepping." You snap your focus back to the trailer, what passes for one. It is merely a game path, barely visible as it winds through the pine and aspen. One misstep on these slopes invite a broken ankle, and out here, a fractured ankle is effectively a death sentence. "How much further to the river?" you ask, adjusting the biting weight of the pack on your shoulders. Bill doesn't bother to turn around. "When we get there, we'll be there." A classic mountain man response. These men didn't wear watches, they didn't carry calendars. Time was measured in seasons, in daylight, in distance conquered. Speaking of which, I spent an embarrassing amount of time researching how far mountain men typically traveled in a day. The answer? It varied wildly. On decent terrain, perhaps 15 or 20 miles. In the teeth of the mountains or bad weather, sometimes only 3 to 5. They weren't trying to make records, they were trying not to die. 2 hours later, you are drenched in sweat despite the ambient chill. The slope has steepened, the forest thickened into a tangle. Your thighs burn with the monotony of picking through deadfall and scree. Then you hear it, the distant, heavy rush of water. Bill pauses, head cocked, listening to the roar. "River's up," he notes grimly. "Spring melt is still coming down from the high country." That is not good news. High water means dangerous trapping. Another hour of punishing hiking brings you to a clearing, and there it is, the river. It is not some gentle, bubbling trout stream, but a churning, frothing monster cutting through the valley like a liquid knife. "Now we get to work," Bill says, dropping his pack. This is where the actual commerce of the mountain man begins. Forget the romanticized oil paintings of men astride horses, gazing out over stunning vistas. The reality is brutal, exhausting, and often visceral. The harvesting of beavers. "First thing," Bill says, opening his pack, "we need to make bait." He retrieves a small, dark object wrapped in oilcloth and unwraps it with care. "What is that?" you ask, though the scent hits you before you see it, sharp, musky, and entirely alien. "Castor gland," Bill grunts, displaying a shriveled, dark brown lump roughly the size of your thumb, "from the last beaver I took back in April." I consulted a few experts on this. The common misconception is that this is a beaver's testicle. Not exactly, a historian corrected. Castor glands are located near the beaver's anal gland, but they're distinct from the reproductive organs. They produce a substance called castoreum, which beavers use to mark their territory. Whatever the anatomical specifics, the important detail was this: it stank, and beavers could smell it from remarkable distances. You watch as Bill begins the alchemy of bait preparation in a small pot. He adds the gland, then retrieves small pouches from his possibles bag. Cinnamon, he explained, adding a pinch of brown powder, clove, nutmeg. Finally, he unstopped a flask and poured a splash of amber liquid into the mixture. Whiskey. The resulting paste resembles something you might scrape off a boot heel, yet to a beaver it is apparently irresistible. Why does that work, you ask, fighting the urge to gag at the fumes. Bill shrugged. Smells like another beaver. Males think it's competition. Females think it's a mate. Either way, they come looking. There lies the brilliant simplicity of frontier knowledge. There were no white papers, no controlled double-blind experiments, generations of brutal trial and error preserved by those who survived long enough to pass the lesson down. Now for the traps, Bill says, moving toward the riverbank. The traps themselves are studies in brutal efficiency, constructed of forged iron.
Weighing roughly 5 pounds apiece, they are equipped with powerful spring mechanisms and steel jaws. They are designed to seize a beaver by the leg and hold it fast until the trapper returns. Typically, we would submerge these, Bill explains, wading into the shallows. The beaver swims up, drawn by the bait, steps on the pan, and snaps. He demonstrates the trigger mechanism with practiced ease. But with the river this high, we adapt. Instead of a deep water set, Bill identifies a small channel as a likely transit corridor between the lodge and the feeding grounds. He positions the trap with surgical care, masking it with leaves and mud until it effectively vanishes. We secure it with a stake, he continues, driving a length of wood into the bank and shackling the trap's chain to it. Otherwise, the beaver drags it into deep water and drowns before we get back. You might assume that drowning the beaver is the objective. It is not. A drowned beaver's fur becomes waterlogged, making the pelt significantly harder to preserve. Trappers preferred to find the animal alive, which, inevitably, meant they had to dispatch it themselves. Mountain men were not sentimentalists. This was industry, pure and simple. Now the bait, Bill says. He takes a smear of the foul paste and applies it to a stick positioned near the trap. The logic is primal. The beaver detects the scent of an intruder, investigates, and steps directly into the jaws. You assist Bill in setting 4 more traps along the river, absorbing the technique in real time. It is precise work, demanding a sharp eye and an intuitive understanding of animal behavior. We'll check these at dawn, Bill says as you finish the last set. Now we need shelter. The sky has curdled into a heavy gray and the temperature is plummeting. The weather in the high country shifts with a volatility that mocks the rapid-fire refresh of a social media feed. Looks like snow, you observe, eyeing the gathering storm. Bill nods. Before nightfall, we need a proper shelter up. Not like the basic bedrolls under pond boughs from last night. With snow coming, exposure is the primary threat. What kind of shelter, you ask? Wiki up, Bill answers. Simple, effective. I spent some time with a wilderness survival expert to understand the provenance of these structures. The mountain men appropriated the design directly from the Native Americans. The wiki-up was essentially a domed framework of poles, thatched with brush, bark, or hides. You spend the next 2 hours harvesting materials, cutting saplings for the frame, collecting pine boughs, and stripping bark from deadfall. The labor is punishing, yet it serves as a furnace against the increasingly bitter wind. Bill directs the construction with an economy of words, showing rather than telling you how to bend and lash the saplings to create a dome roughly 5 feet high and 8 feet across. Big enough for 2 men and a small fire, he says, stepping back to assess the skeleton of the lodge. Now cover it. You layer pine boughs over the structure, working from the bottom up, creating overlapping rows like shingles to shed the moisture, in this case the snow. By the time you finish, fat, heavy flakes are already descending. The forest quiets, the acoustic world dampened by the snowfall. The river continues its roar, but everything else seems to hold its breath. Get firewood, Bill commands.
Dry as you can find. Look under fallen logs, inside hollow trees. You scavenge while Bill engineers a fire pit inside the wickiup, clearing a circle of earth and ringing it with river stones. As darkness finally claims the valley, you crawl into the shelter with an armload of the driest wood you could salvage. Bill has a small fire already catching, the smoke spiraling toward a vent he left at the structure's apex. "Not too big," Bill warns. "Too much smoke will blind us." The small space warms rapidly, though the smoke stings your eyes despite Bill's careful management. You sit with your back against the curved wall, watching the snow fall through the smoke hole above. "Will the trap still work in the snow?" you ask. Bill nods. "Beavers don't care about snow. They keep working. So do we." He retrieves a strip of jerky from his possibles bag and hands it to you. It is as hard as wood, tasting of salt, smoke, and survival. You must gnaw on the jerky for several minutes before it softens enough to chew. It is tough, fibrous, and unyielding, but out here, calories are the only currency that matters. "Tomorrow," Bill says, punctuating his words with tears of dried meat, "we check traps at first light, then move downstream, set more." "How many beavers do we need," you ask, "for it to be worth all this?" Bill considers the mathematics of the trade. 40 or 50 prime pelts would make for a good season. That's about all we can carry anyway. 40 beaver pelts at roughly $5 apiece come to $200, equivalent to over $6,000 today. It is a respectable sum for a few months of hell, provided you survive to spend it. "What about the Blackfeet?" you ask, the morning's tense standoff still vivid in your mind. Bill shrugged. "We keep watch, we move quickly. We don't stay in one place too long." The snow is falling heavily now, a swirling vortex of white visible through the smoke hole above. Inside your crude shelter, the small fire casts feral, dancing shadows against the walls. Despite the smoke, the unyielding ground, and the persistent chill that nips at any exposed skin, a primitive satisfaction settles over you. You have survived another day in a landscape that is entirely indifferent to your existence. "Bill," you say after a long silence. The old man stares into the embers. 15 winters, he finally answers. "Started when St. Louis was barely more than a trading post." "What keeps you coming back?" You gesture vaguely at the wilderness beyond the wickiup walls. Bill doesn't answer immediately. When he does, his voice is quiet but resonant. "Out here, a man knows exactly where he stands. Nature doesn't lie to you, don't cheat you. Tries to kill you, sure, but it's honest about it." He prods the fire with a stick. "Cities are full of men who'd slit your throat for $1. At least out here, you see the knife coming." These mountain men were not merely skilled survivors. They were ascetics of a sort, choosing a brutal liberty over what they perceived as a dishonest civilization. It's a sentiment worth pondering while you lie in your comfortable, safe, modern bed. The fire snaps, spitting a spark on your leg. You brush it away, feeling the cold encroach as the flames dwindle. "Get some sleep," Bill commands. "Dawn comes early, and the beaver won't wait." You settle on your bedroll, using your pack as a makeshift pillow. Outside, the wind rises, whistling through the timber, while snow patters softly against the boughs. Despite the stone beneath you, exhaustion drags at you.
Your limbs. The last image you register before sleep claims you is Bill, still sitting upright, a knife in his hand, eyes fixed on the smoke hole as if expecting a visitor. And you realize he probably is. In the wilderness of 1831, survival was not a skill, it was a state of being. Morning arrives with a cold that penetrates the marrow. You wake to the sound of Bill stoking the fire, the weak flames illuminating his frost-bearded face in the gloom. Outside, 6 inches of snow have blanketed the world, transforming the forest into a silent, alien place. "Trap line," Bill grunts, tossing you a slab of jerky. "Eat while we move." Your body rebels as you rise. Everything hurts. Your back from the stone floor, your hands from yesterday's labor, your feet from miles of trekking in unyielding leather. This is the reality omitted from the adventure novels, the relentless, grinding physical misery of frontier life. What if the traps are buried in snow? You ask, your voice raspy from smoke and sleep. Bill shoots you a look reserved for the hopelessly incompetent. We find them. Right, of course. You crawl out of the wiki up into a transformed landscape. The snow catches the pale blue light of dawning, a vision of beauty when you are not about to wade through it. Stay in my tracks, Bill orders, breaking trail through the fresh powder. You follow, grateful for his wake, though the snow still climbs your shins with each step. Within minutes, your feet are numb and your trousers are soaked to the knee. Remind me why we can't just wait for the snow to melt, you mutter. Bill doesn't bother to turn around. 'Cause we'll starve before spring, boy. A fair point. Mountain men had no concept of sick days or weather delays. Nature does not pause for your comfort. You adapt or you die. The river looks different in the morning light, still dangerous, but softened by the snow-clad banks. Bill navigates to the first trap, guided by memory rather than markers. Here, he says, halting at a nondescript patch of snow-covered ground. He kneels, brushes away the white powder, and locates the chain. He gives it a tug. Resistance. Got something, he says, a rare note of satisfaction in his voice. He hauls the chain steadily, dragging the trap up from the slurry of leaves and mud. And there it is. A large beaver is fouled in the steel jaws, indisputably dead. Drowned itself, Bill notes, examining the carcass. It had dragged the trap into deeper water despite the stake. The animal is more substantial than you expected, perhaps 30 pounds, possessing that rich, dark fur and the iconic flat tail. But it is the front paws that arrest you. They are dexterous, almost human, like the hands of a small child. The sight invokes a squeamishness you hadn't anticipated. Don't go soft, Bill warns, catching your expression. Ain't a pet. I know. You reply quickly. Just bigger than I thought. Bill nods. Good size. Prime pelt. He draws his knife, not the small blade at his belt, but a larger instrument from his pack. Now begins the anatomy lesson, skinning. Bill works with a fluid, practiced economy, making an initial incision around the hind legs and peeling the hide away essentially like a wet sock, turning it inside out as he goes. Keep the fur side in, he instructs. Keeps it clean, makes it easier to flesh later. The olfactory assault is an immediate, pungent cocktail of wet fur, river mud, and a musk that is singularly beaver. It is revolting, but you are beginning to realize that pleasant scents are a luxury of civilization. What about the meat, you ask, as Bill severs the final connective tissue. Edible, Bill says. Some parts are better than others. We'll take the tail and the back legs. Rest goes back to the forest. Wait, the tail? Bill almost smiles. Mostly fat, good eating in winter. I verified this later. Beaver tail was a prized delicacy among both mountain men and indigenous tribes. It is essentially a calorie bomb, pure fat, which made it incredibly valuable in an environment where calories were the difference between life and death. Trappers would roast it over a fire until the scaly armor blistered and peeled away, revealing the rich, fatty tissue within. With the beaver processed, Bill resets the trap and moves to the next location. You follow, burdened with a wet pelt and a few pounds of meat wrapped in oilcloth. The second trap is empty, though clearly disturbed. Something set it off, Bill mutters, inspecting the mechanism. Could have been anything, branch in the current, muskrat, even a fish. He resets it with care, refreshing the caster bait. The third trap, however, holds a prisoner. It is a beaver, smaller than the first, but very much alive. Step back, Bill cautions. The animal thrashes as you approach, baring teeth that are essentially organic chisels. I've read that beaver incisors can reach 20 centimeters in length. They can fell a 12-inch diameter tree in under an hour. One does not want to imagine their effect on a human tibia. Bill approaches from the rear, and with a single percussive blow of a short club, ends it. The efficiency is almost merciful. There is no prolonged suffering. Now you do the skinning, Bill says, stepping back. You hesitate with knife in hand. I don't want to mess up the pelt.
You will, Bill says, his tone flat. The only way to learn is to ruin a few. Better to ruin this small one than a prime pelt later. So you kneel in the snow, attempting to replicate Bill's surgery. Your cuts are hesitant, your hands clumsy and numbed by the cold. The hide refuses to separate as easily as Bill commanded. You're cutting too deep, Bill corrects, just through the skin, not into the meat. You adjust the pressure to find the correct setting. It is disturbingly intimate work, this manual separation of skin from flesh. By the time you finish, you are bloodied to the wrists, and the pelt is, well, ragged. But it is intact. It'll do, Bill says. Coming from him, that is practically a standing ovation. The fourth and fifth traps are empty, though Bill seems unsurprised. In 1-3 is good odds, Bill explains as you hike back to camp. 2 and 5 is excellent. Back at the wickiup, Bill introduces the next stage of the process, fleshing. He takes the first pelt and spreads it over a smooth log positioned near the fire. The hide is inside out, the fur protecting the wood, leaving the skin side streaked with fat and the membrane exposed. He retrieves a specialized tool from his pack, a dull, curved blade attached to a handle. Fleshing knife, he explains. Too sharp, and you'll cut through the hide. You watch him as he scrapes the skin side, removing every vestige of fat and tissue. Clean hide takes the tanning better. Any flesh left will rot, ruin the pelt. After the demonstration, he hands you the tool. It's your turn. Your attempts are tentative at first, then too aggressive. Bill adjusts your technique with gruff monosyllables. By the time you finish the second pelt, your arms burn with the repetitive strain, but the hide is clean. Now we
Stretch them, Bill says. He produces several metal hoops from his pack, circular frames about 2 feet in diameter. In the old days, we'd make these from willow branches, he notes. These travel better. The wet pelts are stretched taut over the hoops, the edges secured with small wooden pins driven through the skin and into the frame. When finished, they look like furry tambourines. They'll dry by tomorrow, Bill says. Then we pack them and move on. That's it? You ask. Bill shakes his head. That's just the start. At the rendezvous, we'll sell these to the company men. They'll send them east, where they'll be properly tanned and made into hats. The famous Beaver hats. This is the engine of the entire enterprise, fashion trend that drove men to the edges of the known world, risking death daily. What about the meat, you ask, nodding to the butchered parts. Stew, Bill says. But first, we need to do something about those clothes of yours. You look down at your trousers. They are soaked from the snow and beginning to freeze as the temperature drops again. Your fine St. Louis garments were never designed for this latitude. What's wrong with my clothes? Bill snorts. Cotton kills, boy. Gets wet, stays wet. You freeze to death. Need something that works in this country. Like what? Buckskin, Bill says simply. And lucky for you, I got a hide nearly ready. From his pack, Bill produces a rolled deer hide, not a raw pelt like the beaver, but something that has clearly undergone a transformation. Shot a small buck 3 days before I found you, he explains. Been working this hide at night while you sleep. Wait, haven't you been sleeping? No wonder he is always awake before you. Bill shrugs. Sleep when necessary. This was more important. Can't have you dying from wet clothes. There is a strange, rough-hewn stewardship in his gruffness. He may not like you much, but he's invested in keeping you alive. Bill spreads the hide on the ground outside the wickiup. The snow has stopped, though the air remains frigid. First step in making buckskin is getting a fresh hide, he explains. Then you do the same as with the beaver. Flesh it, get all the meat and fat off. He hides it from you, showing you that it is clean, with the hair already removed, leaving only the skin. Had to scrape the hair off, he explains. Different from beaver. We want the fur on those, but for buckskin, we want just the leather. One of the nuances often overlooked in historical accounts is the lack of true waterproof fabrics. Wool retained warmth when wet, but became dangerously heavy. Buckskin was lightweight and an excellent windbreak, but it required specific preparation.
Mountain men had to be material scientists of their environment. "Now comes the important part," Bill says, picking up a small wooden bowl sitting by the fire. Inside is a grayish mass that looks like... Oh, God. "Is that..." you start, already dreading the answer. "Brains," Bill confirms. "From the deer. Every animal has just enough brains to tan its own hide." That isn't just a mountain man colloquialism. It is a biological fact for most species. A deer's brain contains enough oils and lecithin to adequately tan its own skin, nature's perfect recycling system. You watch, fascinated and slightly nauseated, as Bill mixes the brains with warm water into a paste. He works this mixture deep into the hide, coating every inch of the surface. "Brain oils break down the fibers," he explains as he kneads the material. "Makes the hide soft, supple. Otherwise it dries hard as a board." The smell is distinctive, not as repulsive as you feared, but certainly not a candidate for a cologne. "This stays on overnight," Bill says, rolling up the hide with the brain mixture inside. "Tomorrow we'll wash it and start working on it." That night, you sleep deeply despite the cold and the unyielding ground. Exhaustion had finally conquered discomfort. You dream of beaver teeth and men wearing skins, of rivers rushing with gold coins instead of water. You wake to Bill's voice. "Up, got work to do." The morning is clear, the sun rising in a cloudless sky that promises, at least temporarily, better weather. After a breakfast of beaver tail, which is surprisingly palatable, rich and fatty like bone marrow, Bill retrieves the deer hide. "Now we wash out the brains," he says, taking the bundle to the river's edge. You help him rinse the hide thoroughly in the freezing water. The brain mixture washes away, leaving the leather lighter in color. "Next part is the real work," Bill says, hauling the wet hide back to camp. For the next 2 hours, you watch and then assist as Bill demonstrates the labor of softening. This involves stretching, pulling, and working every square inch of the material as it dries. "Keep it moving," Bill instructs. "If it dries stiff, all that brain work was for nothing." You take turns pulling the hide over a smooth log, using your body weight to create tension, then working it with your hands to massage the fibers. It is exhausting, physical, the kind that burns the shoulders and cramps the fingers. "In the old days," Bill says, between pulls, native women would chew the hide to soften it. "Chew it?" you repeat, horrified. Bill nods. "Hours of chewing, every inch, makes for the softest buckskin." You look down at the hide in your hands with a newfound appreciation. "Think I'll stick with this method." By midday, the hide had transformed from stiff raw material into something soft and flexible, almost like cloth, but stronger. The color had shifted to a soft yellowish tan. "Not done yet," Bill says, just as you think the ordeal is over. Most important step left, which is smoking. Raw tanned hide gets wet, it stiffens right back up. Smoking fixes that. Bill constructs a specialized fire pit a short distance from the wickiup. It's essentially a hole in the ground with a mound built up around it. "Needs smoke, not flame," he explains, filling the pit with rotten wood and damp, punky logs he collected from the forest floor. I looked into this term later. Punky wood refers to timber that is partially decomposed, soft and spongy from fungal activity. It smolders rather than burns, producing thick, heavy smoke, perfect for this application. With the smoke-producing fire ready, Bill sews the buckskin into a rough bag shape using sinew, thin, strong fibers from animal tendons that serve as thread. He leaves one end open. "Now we let the smoke do its work," he says. He erects a tripod of sticks over the fire pit and suspends the buckskin bag from the frame, the open end positioned directly over the smoking pit. He places stones around the bottom edge to seal it and trap the smoke inside. "Smoke goes in, can't get out," he explains, penetrates every fiber. The rich, thick smoke billows up into the buckskin bag, inflating it like a primitive balloon. The smell is earthy and strong, not unpleasant, but pervasive. You know instinctively that this scent will never fully leave the leather. "How long does this How long does this take? You ask. Hours, Bill says. Sometimes a day. Depends on the hide. While the buckskin smokes, Bill turns his attention to the beaver pelts, which are still taut on the willow hoops. Another day for these, he assesses, running his finger along the drying skin. Then we pack them and move on. The rhythm of mountain life is becoming legible to you now. There is a cadence here that cannot be rushed. Nature dictates the schedule. Humans merely adapt. The snow, the river, the migration of animals, and the arc of the sun are the immutable forces that determine when work begins and ends. Late in the evening, Bill checks the smoking buckskin. Satisfied with the color, now a rich golden brown, he removes it from the frame. Done, he announces, laying it out on the earth. Now we can make you something useful. The material has transformed once again. It remains soft and flexible, but it now carries that distinctive smoky fragrance that defines genuine buckskin. Bill sets to work with his knife, cutting into the leather without a pattern or template, guided only by the somatic memory of necessity. He fashions a simple pullover shirt and a pair of leggings designed to tie onto a belt. Try these, he says, handing you the rough-hewn garments. Better than what you got. You slip the buckskin shirt over your cotton one. The difference is immediate. It blocks the wind entirely, feet your city clothes never managed. The leggings, once tied over your damp trousers, provide instant relief from the biting cold. This is amazing, you admit, moving your arms to test the fit. Ain't pretty, Bill acknowledges, but it'll keep you alive. It's strange to wear something so primitive, yet undeniably practical. There are no buttons, no fine stitching, no fashionable cut, only pure function. Your fine St. Louis attire suddenly seems ridiculous, as if you had attempted to survive the wilderness in a tuxedo. What makes buckskin so good, you ask, genuinely curious. Bill pauses, unaccustomed to explaining the obvious. Breathes, he finally says, keeps wind out, but sweat can escape, dries quickly if it gets wet. Strong, won't tear in the brush. Quiet, won't make noise when you're hunting. He touches the material on your shoulder, and with the smoking, it stays soft even after soaking. You're beginning to understand that mountain men were not merely tough, they were practical scientists. Every habit and technique was a hypothesis proven through generations of trial and error. As evening approaches, you assist Bill in preparing another meal, a stew of beaver meat, bolstered by dried roots and herbs from
his possibles bag. It is rich and gamey, but hot and filling. Tomorrow we recheck the traps, Bill says as darkness claims the valley. Then we move downstream. Need to set more. How far do we go? Until we find good beaver sign or hit Blackfoot territory, Bill answers. Then we turn and work back upstream. It is a life of perpetual motion. Home is nothing more than what you carry on your back or build before sunset. That buckskin will be your second skin out here, Bill adds, nodding at your new attire. Treat it right, it'll last years. You look down at through the garment. I felt a sudden attachment to it. This isn't just clothing. It is a tangible symbol of adaptation, shedding the city boy to become something new. I've seen men die from the simplest things out here, Bill muses, his voice low as he stares into the fire. Not the bears or the Indians that get most. It's the little things. Wrong clothes, wet feet, not enough food. Stored. Pride. Pride, you echo? Bill nods. Too proud to admit they don't know something. Too proud to change. He gestures at your shirt. City men come out here thinking they know better than those who've lived it. Nature sorts that thinking out real quick. The fire crackles in the ensuing silence. Outside, an owl calls into the void. The temperature is dropping rapidly, and stars appear in brilliant clusters through the smoke hole of your shelter. Get some sleep, Bill finally says. Dawn comes early. Always dawn. Always more work. The endless cycle of survival. You settle onto your bedroll.
The ground is no softer than before, yet your body seems less resistant to adapting like the buckskin, hardening with each passing day. Through half-closed eyes, you watch Bill meticulously, cleaning his knife. He is always prepared, always projecting his mind toward the next need, the next threat. "Bill," you murmur, sleep pulling at your consciousness. "Thanks for the buckskin." He doesn't look up from his blade. Ain't kindness, just practical. But you are starting to understand that out here, keeping someone alive is the profoundest kindness possible. As you drift off, you run your fingers over the soft leather. From deer to clothing in a matter of days, from living animal to survival tool through an ancient alchemy no factory could improve upon. In the city, the origins of things are abstract. Out here, everything has a visible cost. Everything connects directly to life or death. Your last thought before sleep claims you is a strange realization. For the first time since arriving in this brutal wilderness, you feel something akin to belonging. Not comfort, but purpose, understanding, and the first faint echo of the knowledge that has kept mountain men alive in a land that wants them dead. Dawn brings a new sound, one that makes your blood run cold, a deep, cracking groan of ice shearing against ice. Bill is already up, standing at the edge of the camp, staring toward the river with an expression you have learned to dread. "What's happening?" you ask, rolling stiffly out of your bedroll, grateful that the buckskin kept you noticeably warmer. Through the night. "Spring melt coming down from the high country," Bill says, nodding toward the sound. "River's rising." You join him at the clearing's edge. The river, which yesterday was merely threatening, is now terrifying. Swollen with meltwater, it has risen at least 2 feet overnight. The current has accelerated into a violent churn, carrying chunks of ice and entire trees ripped from the upstream banks. "What about the traps?" you ask, though you already know the answer. Bill spits. "Gone, or soon will be." "All of them?" The dismay in your voice is palpable. 2 days of labor and valuable equipment were erased. Bill shrugs, though you can see the calculation rapid-firing behind his eyes. Traps were expensive, costing $3 each in 1831. In modern currency, that is a loss of nearly $500, vanished in a night. "We need to cross," Bill says, after a long moment of studying the water. You look at him as if he has lost his mind. "Cross that?" The river is 40 yards wide, running fast and lethal, weaponized with debris that could crush a man in an instant. Swimming is suicide. "Need to check the other bank," Bill explains. "This side's getting trapped out, and we need to get ahead of that water. It'll flood this whole bottom by tomorrow." You stare at the raging torrent. How exactly are we supposed to cross that? For the first time since you met him, Bill almost smiles. "We build a boat." "A boat," you repeat flatly. "Out here? With what?" Bill gestures to the timber surrounding you. "With that, like the old-timers did." Mountain men were masters of improvisation. If they needed something, they fabricated it from the materials at hand. This, you realize, is the ultimate survival skill. It isn't about specific techniques, it is the mindset, the ability to look at a lethal problem and engineer a solution using nothing but the forest floor. "What kind of boat?" you ask, already mentally cataloging the tools you have between you. "Bull boat," Bill answers. "Simple works." Traditionally, these were fashioned from buffalo hide, but deer will serve in a pinch. You follow Bill back to camp, where he unends his pack and begins sorting through his inventory. He retrieves an unmounted axe head, carried sans handle to shave weight, and a coil of rawhide cord. "First, we need the right wood," he says, lashing the steel head to a stout branch he has cut with his knife. Primitive but effective. The next 2 hours are spent gathering materials. Bill dispatches you to harvest willow branches, long, flexible switches, at least an inch thick at the base. Meanwhile, he ventures deeper into the timber, returning with several straight pine saplings, roughly 2 inches in diameter. Willows for the frame, pine for the support, he explains, dropping his burden at the camp. I later consulted a wilderness survival instructor regarding the bullboat. His verdict was one of admiration for its practicality. He explained that the design was appropriated from Native American craft, particularly those of the Plains tribes, essentially a round coracle constructed of a wooden framework and sheathed in hide. They were not designed for long-distance travel, but for the specific tactical problem of crossing water. Under Bill's direction, you bend the willow branches into a rough circle, approximately 7 feet in diameter. The ends are overlapped and lashed securely with raw hide. More willows are bent across this circle, Bill instructs, creating a basket-like framework. Now the cross braces, he says, cutting the pine saplings to length and lashing them across the willow skeleton to provide rigidity. The work proceeds rapidly, with 2 sets of hands holding tension while the other ties the knots. By midday, you have constructed a sturdy circular frame that resembles an enormous shallow basket. Now for the covering, Bill says, opening his pack once more. He produces another deer hide, larger than the one used for your buckskin clothing and still bearing its hair. Seeing your surprise, he offers a brief explanation. Always carry a spare hide, too useful to be without. The hide is stiff, yet workable. Bill demonstrates how to stretch it over the frame. Hair side down, Bill commands. We want the smooth side out, less drag in the water. The hide barely spans the frame, its edges just reaching the bottom rim. Bill uses an awl to punch holes along the perimeter of the skin, then threads rawhide through, lashing it violently tight to the wood. Needs to be waterproof, he explains, working methodically around the circle. Any gap and we sink. Once the hide is secured, Bill produces a small pot of rendered animal fat from his pack. Bear grease, he says, makes it waterproof. Together you coat the outer surface of the bullboat with the grease, paying particular attention to the seams where the hide is lashed to the wood. I ain't pretty, Bill acknowledges when the task is complete, but it'll float. The vessel is primitive, bordering on the comical. It is a round, shallow basin, 7 feet across and perhaps 2 feet deep. It resembles nothing more than a giant hide-covered saucer. How do we steer it, you ask, circling the craft with open skepticism. You don't, exactly. With what? I don't see any oars. Bill picks up a straight branch, roughly 5 feet long, with this, or your hands if needed. You look from the stick to the raging river, and then back to the saucer. You can't be serious. Dead serious, Bill says. Bullboats have crossed every river in the West. Not elegant, but they work. You assist Bill in hauling the craft to the river's edge. Up close, the water is even more intimidating, thick with silt, churning with a violence that makes your knees weak and carrying all manner of debris. We'll put in above that bend, Bill says, pointing upstream. Current will push us across and down. We aim to land there. He indicates a spot on the far bank, perhaps a quarter-mile downstream. What about the gear, you ask, though you already know the answer. Bill spits. Gone, or soon will be. All of them? The dismay in your voice is palpable. 2 days of labor and valuable equipment were erased. Bill shrugs, though you can see the calculation rapid firing behind his eyes. Traps were expensive, costing $3 each in 1831. In modern currency, that is a loss of nearly $500, vanished in a night. We need to cross, Bill says, after a long moment of studying the water. You look at him as if he has lost his mind. Cross that? The river is 40 yards wide, running fast and lethal, weaponized with debris that could crush a man in an instant. Swimming is suicide. Need to check the other bank, Bill explains. This side's getting trapped out, and we need to get ahead of that water. It'll flood this whole bottom by tomorrow. You stare at the raging torrent.
How exactly are we supposed to cross that? For the first time since you met him, Bill almost smiles. We build a boat. A boat, you repeat flatly.
Out here? With what? Bill gestures to the timber surrounding you. With that, like the old-timers did. Mountain men were masters of improvisation. If they needed something, they fabricated it from the materials at hand. This, you realize, is the ultimate survival skill. It isn't about specific techniques, it is the mindset, the ability to look at a lethal problem and engineer a solution using nothing but the forest floor. What kind of boat, you ask, already mentally cataloging the tools you have between you. Bull boat, Bill answers. Simple, works. Traditionally, these were fashioned from buffalo hide, but deer will serve in a pinch. You follow Bill back to camp, where he upends his pack and begins sorting through his inventory. He retrieves an unmounted axe head, carried sans handle to shave weight, and a coil of rawhide cord. First, we need the right wood, he says, lashing the steel head to a stout branch he has cut with his knife. Primitive, but effective. The next 2 hours are spent gathering materials. Bill dispatches you to harvest willow branches, long, flexible switches, at least an inch thick at the base. Meanwhile, he ventures deeper into the timber, returning with several straight pine saplings, roughly 2 inches in diameter. Willows for the frame, pine for the support, he explains, dropping his burden at the camp. I later consulted a wilderness survival instructor regarding the bull boat. His verdict was one of admiration for its practicality. He explained that the design was appropriated from Native American craft, particularly those of the Plains tribes, essentially a round coracle constructed of a wooden framework and sheathed in hide. They were not designed for long-distance travel, but for the specific tactical problem of crossing water. Under Bill's direction, you bend the willow branches into a rough circle, approximately 7 feet in diameter. The ends are overlapped and lashed securely with rawhide. More willows are bent across this circle, Bill instructs, creating a basket-like framework. Now the cross braces, he says, cutting the pine saplings to length and lashing them across the willow skeleton to provide rigidity. The work proceeds rapidly, with 2 sets of hands holding tension while the other ties the knots. By midday, you have constructed a sturdy circular frame that resembles an enormous, shallow basket. Now for the covering, Bill says, opening his pack once more. He produces another deer hide, larger than the one used for your buckskin clothing, and still bearing its hair. Seeing your surprise, he offers a brief explanation. Always carry a spare hide, too useful to be without. The hide is stiff, yet workable. Bill demonstrates how to stretch it over the frame. Hair side down, he commands. We want the smooth side out, less drag in the water. The hide barely spans the frame, its edges just reaching the bottom rim. Bill uses an awl to punch holes along the perimeter of the skin, then threads rawhide through, lashing it violently tight to the wood. Needs to be waterproof, he explains, working methodically around the circle. Any gap, and we sink. Once the hide is secured, Bill produces a small pot of rendered animal fat from his pack. Bear grease, he says, makes it waterproof. Together, you coat the outer surface of the bull boat with the grease, paying particular attention to the seams where the hide is lashed to the frame. Ain't pretty, Bill acknowledges when the task is complete, but it'll float. The vessel is primitive, bordering on the comical. It is a round, shallow basin, 7 feet across and perhaps 2 feet deep. It resembles nothing so much as a giant hide-covered saucer. How do we steer it, you ask, circling the craft with open skepticism. You don't, exactly, Bill admits. With what? I don't see any oars. Bill picks up a straight branch, roughly 5 feet long. With this, or your hands if needed. You look from the stick to the raging river and then back to the saucer. You can't be serious. Dead serious, Bill says. Bull boats have crossed every river in the West. Not elegant, but they work. You assist Bill in hauling the craft to the river's edge. Up close, the water is even more intimidating, with silt churning with a violence that makes your knees weak, and you're carrying all manner of debris. We'll put in above that bend, Bill says, pointing upstream. Current will push us across and down.
We aim to land there. He indicates a spot on the far bank, perhaps a quarter-mile downstream. What about our gear, you ask? Most stays here, Bill says. We cross, scout the other side, then come back for it. Boat can't hold everything. That offers a marginal comfort. At least when this thing sinks, you won't lose your entire worldly possessions. Bill places his rifle, powder horn, and possibles bag in the center of the hull, covering it with an oilcloth. You do the same with your weapon. If it goes over, let it go, Bill instructs. Seriously, gear can be replaced. You can't. With the cargo secured, Bill demonstrates the boarding procedure. It is trickier than it looks. The bullboat possesses no keel, nothing to stabilize it or keep it upright. It shifts and lists with every redistribution of weight. Low center of gravity, Bill advises, kneeling in the bottom rather than sitting. Keep your weight in the middle. You follow his example, kneeling opposite him in the round craft. Even with just the two of you and minimal gear, the bullboat sits alarmingly low in the water, its rim hovering a mere 6 inches above the surface. Ready? Bill asks, using his stick to push off the bank. No, you think, not even remotely. But you nod anyway. The current seizes the craft immediately, spinning it like a leaf in a gutter. Bill digs his stick into the torrent, attempting to influence your vector rather than actually propel the craft. Use your stick, Bill shouts over the roar of the water. Other side! You drive your branch into the torrent, feeling the torque of the current threaten to wrench the wood from your grip. Together, you and Bill engage in a desperate asymmetrical ballet, paddling to fight the spin, leaning to counter the roll. Water washes over the gunwale with every lurch. The bullboat is floating, but only by the grace of physics. Keep bailing, Bill commands. You realize he is already using his free hand to shovel water back into the river. You follow suit, alternating between frantic paddling and frantic bailing. The banks blur into a smear of green and gray as the river hurries you downstream. Then impact. A submerged log or stone slams into the hull, sending the craft into a violent, sickening spin. The river pours in over the dipping rim. Shift your weight, Bill barks, throwing himself to the high side. You scramble to compensate, nearly capsizing the vessel in the opposite direction before finding a precarious equilibrium. But the damage is done. The bottom is awash. You abandon navigation.
For survival, bailing with a manic intensity. Your arms scream in protest. Your hands are numb claws. The far bank rushes to meet you too fast. Back paddle, Bill shouts, driving his stick into the water to break your momentum. You strain against the flow, slowing the craft's velocity just as it strikes a second obstacle. This time, the collision throws you to your hands and knees. We're going over, Bill yells, clutching his rifle and possibles bag. The bullboat lists heavily, the rim dipping below the surface. In seconds, you are floating in a hideaway bathtub filled with the river. Abandon, Bill commands. He rolls over the gunwale into the water. You clutch your rifle and follow. The cold is a physical blow, stealing your breath. The current seizes you instantly, dragging you downstream while the waterlogged bullboat founders behind you. The river is deep here, forcing you to tread water and swim one-armed, holding your weapon aloft like a votive offering. The current tosses you with contempt, spinning you until direction loses all meaning. A branch strikes your back, driving the air from your chest. You gasp, swallowing silt and paddock as your head goes under. Then, solid ground. Your feet find a sandbar. You breach the surface, coughing and sputtering. The water is only chest deep. This way, Bill calls. You spot him wading through waist-deep water toward a slackwater cove. You fight the current one last time, staggering onto the rocky bank and collapsing. Your rifle is miraculously still in your grasp, though thoroughly soaked. Your powder will be useless until it is dried. Boat's gone, Bill states, watching the debris vanish around the river bend. That was your plan? You gasp, once your lungs work again. That death trap? Bill shrugs, already wringing out his buckskin shirt. Got us across, didn't it? You want to argue, but the logic is unassailable. Despite the terror and the destruction of the vessel, the objective was achieved. Would have worked better in calmer water, Bill admits, But we didn't have calm water. That is the frontier reality distilled. You use what you have, not what you wish you had. Perfect solutions are a luxury of civilization. The next hour is spent recovering, drying weapons, wringing out clothes, and assessing the damage. The buckskin, to its credit, has performed admirably. It hasn't become a sodden anchor like wool or cotton, but the temperature is dropping, and clouds are gathering in the west. Fire, Bill decides. He uses the flint and steel from his possibles bag, mercifully kept dry in oilcloth, to spark a flame. Within minutes, a fire burns on the shore. Strip, Bill orders, already peeling off his layers. In the city, he would die of embarrassment. Here, you comply without hesitation. Modesty is a distant second to the threat of hypothermia. As your clothes steam by the fire, Bill surveys the new territory. The bank is steeper here, the timber denser, with less evidence of human traffic. Better trapping here, he observes, scanning the shoreline. See those trees? He points to several aspen and cottonwood trunks, gnawed at the base. Beaver sign, fresh, good-sized colony nearby. Despite the harrowing crossing, you feel a surge of adrenaline. This is why you came west, for the opportunity, the beaver, the profit. How do we get back, you asked, suddenly remembering the bulk of your gear cached on a far shore. We don't, Bill says simply. Not today, maybe not for weeks. You stare at him. But our supplies? Trap here first. Work this bank until we have enough pelts to make the crossing worthwhile. River might be lower by then. And if it's not? Bill shrugs, turning his eyes back to the timber. Build another boat, better one, with more time. This casual acceptance of catastrophe is perhaps the most profound lesson you have learned. Plans evaporate, nature intervenes. You adapt or you die. Can we build a proper shelter, you ask, eyeing the darkening sky? Bill nods. Need to move away from the river first, find higher ground before this bank floods too. Once your clothes are damp rather than sodden, you dress and help Bill extinguish the fire. With minimal gear and no food save for Bill's meager emergency rations, you follow him up a game trail leading away from the river. Half a mile inland, the terrain climbs to a small ridge bristling with pine. Bill selects a site on the leeward side, shielded from the prevailing wind. Here, he decides, good drainage, shelter from the weather, close to water but safe from the flood. The shelter you construct is more substantial than the wickiup you built the previous night. With the immediate threat of the river receding, Bill instructs you on the construction of a lean-to, utilizing fallen timber for the main support and pine boughs for the roof and walls. Angled to reflect the fire's heat, he explains, digging a long, narrow fire pit parallel to the open face of the structure. By nightfall, you have established a surprisingly comfortable camp. The lean-to is spacious enough for both of you to stretch out, with the fire providing a wall of thermal energy that reflects off the sloped roof. Tomorrow we make new traps, Bill says as darkness falls. Can't replace the iron ones, but we can make deadfalls. Deadfalls? Log traps. Primitive, but they work. Indians used them long before white men brought steel. The prospect of starting from scratch is daunting, yet there's a strange pride in the realization that you are not helpless without manufactured tools. With no food but a scrap of jerky from Bill's reserve, you go to bed hungry. But the shelter is warm, the fire crackles with a comforting rhythm, and exhaustion soon drags you under. Bill, you say as your eyes grow heavy, why do mountain men use bow boats instead of, real boats, canoes? Bill shifts in his bedroll. Wait, he answers simply. Can't carry a canoe over mountains. Bow boat you build when needed. Use it, leave it, build another one somewhere else. The perfect tool for men who travel light and adapt to their environment rather than attempting to impose civilization upon it. Would have worked better if the river hadn't flooded, you observed drowsily. Usually does, Bill agrees, but usually gets men killed out here. As you drift toward sleep, you realize that this is perhaps the day's critical insight. There is no usual in the wilderness. Guarantees, only skills, judgment, and the willingness to gamble everything on a hide-covered frame of sticks when the river demands crossing. The roar of the water follows you into your dreams, where you spin endlessly in a bullboat that never sinks and never finds the shore, always in the currents, always at the mercy of forces beyond your control, just like life on the frontier. Morning arrives with the distant rumble of thunder. Your body is a catalog of complaints, muscles stiff from the swim, skin chafed by damp buckskin, stomach hollowed from hunger. But you are alive, and that is the only metric that counts. Bill is already up, standing at the ridge's edge, reading the landscape with practiced eyes. "Storm coming,"
he says as you join him. 2, maybe 3 hours away. You scan the horizon. The sky appears mostly clear, save for a faint bruising to the west. How can you tell? Birds, he says, pointing to a flock hurrying eastward. They know. So do I. You have noticed this about Bill, and presumably all mountain men who survived more than a single season. They do not merely observe nature, they read it like a text written in wind patterns, animal behavior, and cloud formations. What's the plan, you ask? Your stomach answers for you with an audible growl. Food first, Bill says, then navigation. He leads you down the ridge toward a small creek that feeds the main river. The water here runs clear, a stark contrast to the muddy violence you navigated yesterday. Watch, Bill says, stopping at the creek bank. He stands motionless, eyes fixed on the water. You wait, struggling to match his stillness, unsure of the objective. Then Bill moves at high speed, startles you. His hands plunge into the water and emerge clutching a thrashing trout nearly a foot long. "Breakfast," he announces, tossing the fish onto the bank. Holy, did he just catch a fish with his bare hands? How did you start? Patience, Bill cuts you off, seeing where they hold in the current. Quick hands. He makes it sound elemental, as if it were a skill possessed by everyone. Your turn, he says, stepping back. Right, because of course he expects you to hand fish immediately. You kneel where Bill stood, studying the water. It is clear but swift, flowing over and around the river stones. You see small fish darting in the current, but they seem impossibly fast. Look for the bigger ones, Bill advises. They hold behind rocks, out of the main current. Wait for them to stop moving. You focus, trying to adopt his vision. Minutes stretch. Your knees soak in the damp earth. Just as you are about to concede defeat, you spot it. A larger shadow, mostly still, hovering in the eddy behind a submerged boulder. Without thinking, you lunge. Your hands hit the cold water, closing around something solid and muscular. Then nothing. The fish slips through your fingers and is gone. Almost, Bill says. Coming from him, it is practically high praise. Again. It takes 3 more attempts before you succeed. Your hands finally clamp around a trout, smaller than Bill's but undeniably a meal, and you manage to fling it onto the bank before it can wriggle free. Got one, you exclaim, feeling a rush of excitement that eclipses the hunger. Bill nods. That's how it's done. Not fancy, just works. Within the hour, you have cleaned the fish and cooked them over a small fire. Seasoned with nothing but a pinch of salt from Bill's stores, it is nevertheless the finest meal you can recall. It is remarkable how starvation recalibrates one's standards. Breakfast concluded, Bill shifts gears. Need to know where we are, he says, leading the way back to the ridge, and where we're going. Don't you have a map? You ask. Bill shoots you a look. Paper maps are useless out here. Rivers change course, landmarks burn or fall. A man who trusts paper is a man who dies lost. So how did mountain men navigate? Not with sextants or the detailed survey maps that wouldn't exist for decades. The rivers are our roads, Bill explains, gesturing to the artery pulsating below your ridge. Learn them, and you can travel anywhere. He points west toward the jagged horizon. That river comes from there. 3 major forks above us. South Fork rises near Spanish lands. Middle Fork holds the best beaver, but the worst Blackfoot trouble. North Fork is mineral springs and poor trapping. This entire geography lesson is drawn directly from memory. No paper, no compass, just knowledge accumulated through brutal experience and shared among mountain men at their yearly rendezvous.
How do you keep it all straight? You ask, genuinely impressed. Bill taps his temple. A man who forgets dies. Simple as that. He leads you back down to the river, to a spot where a fallen tree provides a natural overlook. The river tells you everything you need to know. He points to the water. Color tells you what's upstream. Clear means rock. Brown means the soil could be from recent rain or snowmelt. White water means obstacles. I investigated this later. Mountain men were essentially intuitive hydrologists. The color and turbidity of the water provided critical data about conditions miles upstream, often making the difference between safe travel and disaster. Bill points to a spot where the current forms small standing waves. See how the water humps there? Submerged rock or log. Dangerous. He indicates a swirling eddy nearby. Deep spot there. Good fishing, but dangerous swimming. The river is suddenly transformed before your eyes. It is no longer just water flowing downhill, but a complex schematic revealing depths, hazards, fishing holes, and transit routes. What about direction, you ask? How do you know which way is which without a compass? Point skyward. Sun rises east, sets west, always. And at night, or when it's cloudy? Stars, he says simply. North Star doesn't move. The rest of the sky turns around it. He explains how to locate Polaris using the Big Dipper's pointer stars. Find that, you always know north. South is behind you. East right, west left. What if you can't see the stars? Cloudy night? Then you pay attention during daylight, Bill says, mild irritation creeping into his voice. Note landmarks. Remember, where water flows, it's always downhill. Moss grows thicker on the north side of trees. I've heard that's not always true, you interject, citing a half-remembered book. Bill delivers a withering stare. Books tell you what always happens. I'm telling you what works most of the time. That's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. He leads you further upstream. You notice he is studying the banks with forensic intensity, stopping occasionally to examine tracks in the mud or broken twigs. Reading sign, he explains, catching your questioning look. Everything leaves traces. Beaver, elk, wolf, man. Learn to see what's written on the land. He points to a muddy patch near the water. Deer, 2 of them, doe and a yearling, came to drink at dawn today. You see the track, merely the baseline requirement for survival. Anyone less observant is already dead. As you continue upriver, Bill suddenly freezes, raising a hand to halt you. What? You whisper, scanning for threats. Bill points silently across the river to a small clearing. At first, you see nothing, then movement. A massive brown form detaches itself from the tree line. A bear, a grizzly bear, and not just any bear, a leviathan.
It is the largest animal you have ever seen. Don't move, Bill breathes, his voice barely audible. Wind's in our favor. He doesn't know we're here. The beast ambles to the river's edge, seemingly unconcerned with anything but the water. It dips its enormous head to drink, then straightens, appearing to scan the opposite bank. If he swims across, Bill whispers. What do we do? You whisper back, your heart hammering against your ribs. Hope our rifles still work after yesterday's swim. I researched grizzly encounters with mountain men. They were terrifyingly common. A single swipe from a grizzly could decapitate a man. Their dense hides and heavy bone structure could absorb multiple musket balls without stopping a charge. They were the undisputed apex predators of the Rocky Mountains, and the trappers respected them accordingly. For long minutes you remain frozen, watching the bear patrol the far bank. Finally, to your immense relief, it turns and vanishes back into the timber. That, Bill says as he straightens, is why you always know what's around you. Always have an escape route, always have your weapon ready. Have you ever had to shoot one? You ask, still trembling slightly. Bill nods grimly. Twice, never by choice. You continue upstream, but with a heightened awareness of your surroundings. That bear is still out there, perhaps watching you even now. The wilderness feels suddenly more alive, more malevolent. After about 2 miles of hiking along the riverbank, Bill stops where a small tributary feeds into the main current. Good beaver spot, he declares, examining the muddy banks and nearby trees. Trees. The sign is clear.
Even your untrained eye can now read the landscape, the distinctive pale scarring of gnawed aspen trunks, the slick mudslides where branches were dragged to the water, a partially constructed dam chocking the tributary. No iron traps, you remind him. Don't need them, Bill says, going to make deadfalls instead. He leads you into the timber to harvest materials. Over the next 2 hours, he demonstrates how to build a primitive trap using only what the forest provides. It is essentially a heavy log suspended by a delicate trigger mechanism, positioned to crush the animal when it disturbs the bait. Not as reliable as steel, Bill admits, as you set the first one, but they work. Indians trapped beaver this way for generations before white men brought the iron. You assist in constructing 5 more deadfalls along the paths Bill identifies as active. The labor is time-consuming, yet it offers a primal satisfaction. You are engineering a functional machine using nothing but natural materials and kinetic energy. As you finish the final set, the light begins to fail. The storm Bill predicted is closing in, the clouds stacking into towering, bruised masses of gray. Need shelter, Bill says, eyeing the heavens. Proper one this time. Could be here a while. He selects a site 100 yards from the river on a rise of ground, close enough for water and trapping, but elevated enough to escape a flash flood and shielded by the canopy. This will be our main camp, he decides. What follows is a seminar in frontier architecture. Unlike the ephemeral wiki-up or the hasty lean-to of previous nights, Bill intends to build a half-faced camp, a structure designed for endurance. He begins with 2 trees spaced roughly 10 feet apart. A stout pole is lashed between them at a height of 6 feet, serving as the ridgepole. From this beam, smaller poles are angled down to the earth, forming the skeleton of a sloped roof. Steeper angle than a lean-to, Bill explains, sheds the rain better. You gather pine boughs while Bill weaves a lattice of branches across the frame. The boughs are shingled over this lattice, working from the bottom up to ensure water runoff. The front of the shelter remains open, while the sides and back are sealed with dense brush. The result is a 3-sided sanctuary, its open face positioned away from the prevailing wind. Fire goes here, Bill says, digging a pit a few feet from the opening. Heat reflects off the roof, keeps the inside warm. By the time the first drops fall, you have a shelter that feels positively luxurious compared to your previous accommodations. The interior is spacious enough for both of you to sit upright, stow your gear, and sleep without physical contact. The rain does not begin, it arrives. It is a sudden, violent deluge, hammering the canopy with tropical intensity. The wind drives the water sideways, but your shelter, properly oriented, stays dry. From your vantage point, you watch the storm flay the forest. Lightning strobes, thunder detonates directly overhead, and the world dissolves into a chaotic swirl of water and wind. This is why we moved away from the river, Bill comments, nodding towards the main waterway. Floods in this country can rise 20 feet in minutes. The thought of being caught in such a hydraulic hammer tightens your stomach. There are so many ways to die out here, and each requires a specific catalog of knowledge to evade. As the storm rages, Bill continues your education. The river is the key to everything, he says, whittling a piece of kindling by the small fire you've coaxed to life. Knowing where it goes, what connects to what. He uses the point of his knife to etch a crude map into the dirt floor. Here, we're here. He stabs a point in the dust. The river flows east, eventually joins the Missouri. Follow it west instead, and it leads to the high passes. His knife traces the watercourse, adding tributaries and landmarks with confident strokes. This creek we're on joins 2 miles upstream. Follow it north for 3 days, and you hit Hot Springs. Good wintering spot. The map expands as he speaks, layering geopolitical intelligence over the physical terrain. Blackfeet hunt here in summer, he says, shading an area. Avoid. Crow territory here is friendlier to trappers, but watch your horses. Sioux over here. Depends on the band whether they'll trade or take your scalp. It strikes you that Bill carries this entire complex atlas in his mind. It is not just the topography he has memorized, but the invisible boundaries of tribal territories, the seasonal migration of game, the safe routes, and the kill zones. "How do you remember all this?" you ask, genuinely astonished. Bill looks up from his whittling. "The same way you remember the streets in St. Louis. You live here long enough, and it becomes part of you." The rain persists through the afternoon and bleeds into the evening. You venture out only briefly to confirm the rising water hadn't threatened your camp and to scavenge dry firewood from the underside of fallen logs. By nightfall, you have settled into a domestic routine. The fire reflects off the angled roof, keeping the space warm despite the plummeting temperature outside. Bill instructs you on brewing pine needle tea, an astringent, resinous drink rich in vitamin C, essential for warding off scurvy. Tomorrow, we check the deadfalls. If we're lucky, we'll have beaver for
Breakfast. And if we're not, Bill shrugs. More fish, or maybe grouse. Saw a sign of them nearby. The adaptability still astonishes you. There is no store, no supply chain, only a deep, granular knowledge of what the land provides and the ruthlessness required to take it. "Bill," you say, breaking a comfortable silence, "why did you agree to take me on? I know the company assigned you to show me the ropes, but you could have said no." Bill continues whittling for a long moment, the shavings curling away from his blade before he answers. "Trappin's dying," he finally says. "More men coming west every year, fewer beavers left. The Hudson's Bay Company is poisoning streams up north to keep Americans out of scorched earth policy. And back east, silk hats are becoming fashionable, usurping the beaver." He tests the edge of his knife against his thumb. "Few more years, this life will be gone. Thought someone ought to remember how it was done." The admission catches you off guard. It is the most Bill has revealed regarding his motivations since you met. "So you're teaching me so I can tell others?" you ask. Bill snorts. "I'm teaching you so you don't die before summer. What you do with the knowledge after that ain't my concern." Yet you sense there is more to it, a tacit recognition that the era of the mountain man is entering its twilight. He understands that the incredible library of skills and geographic intuition they have accumulated is destined to vanish with them. Outside, the storm begins to relent, the hammering deluge softening to a rhythmic patter. The thunder retreats, rumbling in the distance like departing artillery. "Get some sleep," Bill says, settling onto his bedroll. "Dawn comes early." You lie back, listening to the rain hiss against the pine bough roof. Despite the hardships of hunger, the cold, the constant proximity of death, there is a growing part of you that understands the seduction of this life. It is the freedom, the ferocious self-reliance, the direct, unmediated connection to the land and its rhythms. As you drift toward sleep, you realize you haven't thought about St. Louis in days. You haven't missed your soft bed, your cooked meals, or your clean linens. Your world has narrowed to the immediate: food, shelter, safety. Yet, paradoxically, it has expanded to encompass an entire mountain range, its rivers, its creatures, its hazards, and its opportunities. Bill is right. The maps that matter cannot be drawn on paper. They exist in the mind, dynamic and constantly updated, alive in a way no printed chart could ever be. And slowly, day by day, you are beginning to cartograph your own internal map of this wild country. It is not yet detailed enough to ensure your survival on your own, but it is a start. Dawn brings a steady drizzle and a bone-deep cold that seeps through your buckskin. The rain persisted through the night, oscillating between a mist and a driving sheet propelled by the wind. The half-faced shelter performed remarkably well, keeping you mostly dry, though the pervasive dampness made sleep fitful. Bill is already moving outside, seemingly impervious to the wet and cold. Mountain men operated regardless of the weather. They had to. Nature does not offer sick days. "Deadfalls," he calls to you, not waiting to see if you follow. You roll stiffly from your bedroll, every muscle in your body lodging a formal protest. The fire you maintain through the night has been reduced to sullen embers, offering little warmth. You feed it the last of your dry wood, knowing you will need to scavenge more soon. Outside, the world is sodden. Water drips from every branch. Puddles stand in every depression. The sky remains a uniform, oppressive gray, promising nothing but more rain. The forest smells different in this weather, more intense somehow. The scent of pine, wet earth, and decaying leaves is amplified by the moisture. You follow Bill through the wet underbrush, your buckskins quickly soaking through as you brush against the waterlogged foliage. Yet, despite the discomfort, you notice the clothing outperforms cotton. It doesn't become heavy and cloying, and it retains a surprising amount of body heat even when wet. The first 4 deadfalls are either empty or sprung without a catch. Bill seems unsurprised, resetting them with minor adjustments to the trigger mechanisms. The 5th, however, holds a prize. "Got one," Bill says with quiet satisfaction. A medium-sized beaver lies crushed beneath the log. The weight had killed it instantly. The fur is a rich and full prime pelt, worth real money. "Carry it back to camp," Bill instructs, already moving to check the final trap. The beaver is heavier than it appears, perhaps 20 pounds of dense muscle and fat. You hoist it over your shoulder, its wet fur immediately soaking your shirt. The last deadfall is empty, but Bill pauses there, examining the ground with a sudden sharp intensity. "What is it?" you ask. He points to the mud nearby. "Someone's been here." You look where he is pointing, but see nothing unusual. "There," Bill says, indicating what looks like a generic patch of mud. "Moccasin print, not old." Now that he has framed it for you, you can just barely discern the impression of a foot. It is so faint, so ephemeral, that you are amazed he spotted it at all. "Blackfeet?" you ask, immediately scanning the tree line. Bill shakes his head. "Crow by the pattern. Less likely to kill us on sight, but they'll still take what they can." "How far?" Your grip tightens on the beaver carcass, a valuable prize you are suddenly reluctant to surrender. "Hard to tell in this rain. Tracks wash out quickly." Bill straightens, his eyes sweeping the forest. "Let's get back to camp. Stay alert." The return trip feels different, charged with a high-voltage tension. Every shadow might conceal a watcher. Every snapping twig could signal an ambush. You find yourself walking with greater stealth, placing your feet with deliberate care, unconsciously mimicking Bill's movement. At camp, Bill immediately begins reinforcing the shelter, weaving brush into the sides to better camouflage it. "Need to smoke the fire," he explains as he works, "less visible that way." While he fortifies the camp, you set to work processing the beaver. The skinning is becoming familiar now, your hands recalling the geometry of the cuts Bill taught you. You're careful to preserve the castor glands. They will be needed for future traps. With the pelt removed and stretched on an improvised frame, you turn to the meat. Beaver flesh is dark, rich with the fat that will be invaluable for the calories it provides. You carve steaks from the hindquarters, setting aside the flat paddle-like tail for special treatment. When Bill returns, he nods approval at your butchery. "Fire's gone," he notes, looking at the cold ash. "Use the last of the dry wood," you explain. "Everything else is soaked." Bill grunts. "Time you learned proper fire-making then. Most important skill out here. You have
Made fires before, of course. In St. Louis, with seasoned wood, newspaper, and matches, it was a triviality. Even during your first nights on the trail, Bill had handled the task, coaxing flame from the ether regardless of the conditions. "Thought we'd need to find dry wood first," you say, eyeing the dripping forest doubtfully. "Wood is everywhere," Bill says. "Dry tinder is what matters, and knowing how to use what you have." He kneels by the cold pit and opens his possibles bag. From it, he removes a small leather pouch, a piece of oddly shaped steel, and a gray stone the size of his thumb. "Flint and steel," he explains, displaying the items. Never leave camp without them. You have seen him use these tools before, but never scrutinized the mechanics. Now, with the rain persisting and the temperature plummeting, the ability to generate heat feels critically important. This, Bill says, holding up the stone, is flint, hard stone that throws sparks when struck right. It's actually chert, but everyone out here calls it flint. He then displays the C-shaped piece of high-carbon steel. Striker. Angle matters. Technique matters. I spent time with a wilderness survival instructor to understand this process. Modern people tend to view flint and steel as primitive, but he assured me it was high technology for its time. The steel had to be forged with precisely the right carbon content. The technique had to be exact. It was the difference between life and death. Bill continues unpacking his kit. A small tin appears, which he opens to reveal blackened scraps of fabric. Char cloth, he explains. Most important part, cotton or linen that's been partially burned without oxygen, catches sparks, holds an ember. The process is more complex than you imagined, just striking rock against metal, but it is a system of specialized materials. Always keep char cloth, Bill emphasizes, showing how his tin is sealed to keep out moisture. No char cloth, no fire. Simple as that. Next, he produces a bundle of dried grass and shredded bark. Tinder bundle. Collect material whenever you find good stuff. Keep some in oilskin for emergencies. You watch as Bill arranges his materials. He places a small square of char cloth atop the flint, pinching both in his left hand. With his right, he grips the steel striker. Watch closely, he instructs. Angle matters. Not hitting the flint, scraping steel across it. Spark needs to land on the char cloth. With a quick, practiced motion, he drags the edge of the striker down the face of the chert. A shower of sparks flies. One lands on the blackened fabric. Instead of extinguishing, it catches, glowing like a tiny red eye. Got it, Bill says with satisfaction. Now the delicate part. He carefully folds the char cloth around the ember and places it into the center of his tinder bundle, the nest of dried grass and bark. He brings the bundle to his face and begins to blow, gently at first, then with increasing pressure as the heat intensifies. Too hard, you blow it out, he explains between breaths. Too soft, it dies. Just right, and a tendril of smoke rises, then another. With sustained rhythmic breathing, a small flame suddenly erupts among the fibers. Bill immediately transfers the nascent fire to the pit, feeding it the smallest, driest twigs he scavenged from the shelter's interior. Fire's a living thing, Bill says as he nurtures the flame. Needs to breathe, needs to eat, needs to be protected when it's young. The flame catches on the twigs, growing cautiously. Bill adds slightly larger fuel, arranging the structure to allow airflow while shielding the infant from the damp air. Your turn, Bill says, extinguishing the small fire with a handful of dirt. Everyone should be able to do this 3 times, at least, in the rain when your hands are cold. The pressure is immediate and intense. Fire isn't just a comfort out here, it is life, especially now with the mercury dropping and your clothes damp. The ability to generate heat could determine whether you survive the night. Bill hands you the kit and steps back to observe. Your first attempts are clumsy. You cannot find the angle. The few sparks you generate miss the char cloth entirely. Your hands, stiff with cold and trembling slightly from the pressure, betray you. Relax, Bill advises. Breathe. Steady hands make fire. Panic kills it. You take a deep breath, adjust your grip, and strike again. This time, a spark lands, creating a tiny red glow. Good, Bill nods. Now, don't waste it. Transfer to your tinder. This proves even harder. You move too quickly, and the ember dies before it can ignite the bundle. Again, Bill commands. It takes 5 more attempts before you successfully nurture a spark into flame. By then, your hands are numb, and frustration has nearly overwhelmed you. But when the flame finally catches, the surge of accomplishment is unlike anything you have experienced. I did it, you breathe, watching the fire dance in your hands. Bill nods. Now you know how to live. Do it again. And so he makes you repeat the process twice more. You create fire from scratch, each time gaining efficiency, the knowledge migrating from your brain to your muscles, becoming instinct. Finally, with a fire established in the pit, Bill introduces the next challenge, finding fuel in a soaked forest. Standing deadwood, he explains, leading you to a gray branchless trunk that died years ago but remains upright. Still good. He teaches you to look for fallen logs elevated off the ground, to check under rock overhangs, and to split larger rounds to access the dry interior. Always be collecting, Bill advises. See good fire material, take it. Never know when you'll need it. Back at camp with an adequate stockpile, Bill demonstrates another technique, banking coals. He shows you how to create a thick layer of ash to insulate the embers, keeping them alive for hours without open flame. Do this at night. In the morning, you have ready coals. No need to start from scratch. As evening approaches, the rain finally ceases, though the clouds linger. You have spent the day mastering fire, processing the beaver and fortifying the camp. The beaver steaks roast on sticks beside the fire, the rich scent maddening after days of deprivation. Most important lesson, Bill says as darkness gathers. No fire, no life. Simple as that. The firelight creates a small circle of warmth and safety in the vast wilderness. Beyond that perimeter, unseen predators move through the dark. Wolves, bears, mountain lions, and possibly humans, more dangerous than any animal. Fire kept our first ancestors alive. Nothing's changed. Man without fire is just slow meat for something faster and hungrier. You reflect on how often you have taken fire for granted. Stoves, fireplaces, matches.
Out here, it is a skill to be mastered, a treasure to be guarded. The beaver meat proves delicious, rich, and dark, reminiscent of beef but with a distinct, gamey depth. The tail, roasted directly in the coals until the scaly skin peels away, is almost entirely a caloric gold mine in an environment where energy is the currency of survival. After eating, you scour your hands with wet sand from the riverbank, a frontier trick. No soap, but the grit removes blood and grease effectively. With full bellies and a healthy fire, the evening takes on an almost comfortable quality. Despite the damp chill, Bill uses the time to work the beaver pelt, scraping and adjusting it on the stretching frame. 15, 20 pelts like this, he says, examining the fur quality, and we can think about heading for rendezvous. Rendezvous, the legendary summer gathering of mountain men, where a year's harvest was traded for supplies, news was exchanged, and hard-earned money was often squandered on whiskey and gambling within days. For many trappers, it was the only human contact they had outside their small partnerships. "Where's rendezvous this year?" you ask. "Green River," Bill answers. "If we make good time, we should hit it by July." July? Months away. The reality of your timeline settles over you, not days or weeks, but a full trapping season. Spring is just beginning, and you won't see civilization again until midsummer. "How long have you been out this time?" you ask. Bill considers. "Left rendezvous last August. Been in the mountains since." He shrugs. "Lost track of exact days. Don't matter much out here." 8 months at least with no contact with the outside world until the fur company agent dropped you into his unwilling care a few weeks ago. No wonder Bill seems more comfortable with silence than conversation. As night deepens, you take turns keeping the fire fed. Sleep comes easier tonight. Your body is exhausted, your mind calmed by the mastery of a new essential skill. In the deepest watch of the night, you experiment again with the flint and steel. The movements feel more natural now, with your hands remembering the angles and the pressure. A spark catches the charcloth, and you nurture it carefully into a tiny flame. Creating fire from nothing but stone, metal, and knowledge feels like a form of magic. Not the theatrical illusions of the city, but the deep, ancient magic of survival. Bill wakes and watches you silently for a moment. "Getting better," he acknowledges, "the closest thing to praise you have received." "It's easier than I thought," you admit. "Once you know how," Bill nods. "Most important things are like that. It looks impossible until you learn the trick. Then you wonder why everyone can't do it." A comfortable silence falls between you, broken only by the pop and crackle of the fire. The warmth, the food in your belly, and the growing confidence in your abilities all combine to create a moment of unexpected contentment amidst the constant challenge. Bill, you ask after a while, what's the hardest part of this life, the thing most city men can't handle? He considers the question, staring into the flames. Loneliness, he finally answers. Not the cold or the work or the danger. Those you get used to, but the silence, being days from any other human voice, weeks from anyone who speaks your language. Some men go mad from it. But not you? A ghost of a smile touches his weathered face. Who says I didn't? It is the closest thing to a joke you have heard from him, and it starts a laugh out of you. Get some sleep, Bill says, assuming the fire watch. Tomorrow we check the traps again, maybe set some more. You settle into your bedroll, watching the firelight play against the roof of the shelter. The skills are accumulating, one by one. Fire, shelter, navigation, trapping. Slowly, the overwhelming wilderness is becoming slightly less formidable. Not safe, never that, but perhaps survivable. Outside, an owl calls into the darkness. The fire pops, sending a column of sparks upward toward the unseen stars. Your last thought before sleep claims you is a surprisingly lucid. Civilization has its comforts, but there is a certain purity to this existence, a clarity that strips away everything but the essentials: food, warmth, shelter, and the knowledge to secure all three. 4 days of steady trapping have passed. The rain has finally moved on, replaced by clear, cold mountain air that feels as though it scrubs your lungs with every breath. Your deadfalls have proven surprisingly effective. 7 beavers have been taken so far, their pelts stretched and drying on frames around the perimeter of your camp. Bill seems pleased, though he expresses it only through a slight reduction in his criticism of your work. Dawn today brings something new, a different kind of urgency in Bill's movements as he scans the sky. What is it, you ask, emerging from the half-faced shelter? You are sleeping better each night now, your body finally adapting to the hard ground. Weather's changing, Bill says, studying the eastern horizon. Warm spell coming. You glance at the frost-covered ground dubiously. Doesn't feel warm. Will be. 2-3 days. Snow will melt in the high country. River will rise again. Bill turns to you. Need to prepare. For what? Hunger. The blunt answer catches you off guard. You've been eating reasonably well. Beaver meat, a few trout, even a grouse Bill snared yesterday. The desperate starvation of your first days feels like a distant memory. We have food, you point out. Bill shakes his head. Fresh meat spoils fast in warm weather, and game moves when water rises. Might be days with nothing to hunt. He begins gathering equipment, his knife, the small axe, and a canvas bag. Today we make insurance. Pemmican. The word is familiar from books you've read on Western exploration. Lewis and Clark carried it. The voyageurs lived on it for months. But you've never seen it made, let alone tasted it. First, we need meat. Lots of it. Bill shoulders his rifle. Deer would be best. You follow him into the forest, moving quietly as he has taught you. The morning is bright, sunlight filtering through the pine boughs, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. Birds call from the canopy, their songs more numerous and varied than in previous years, another harbinger of the coming shift in weather. Bill leads you to a meadow about a mile from camp. Frost still clings to the grass, glittering in the early light. At the meadow's edge, he drops into a crouch, motioning for you to do the same. Wait, he whispers, settling against a fallen log with his rifle across his knees. The wait stretches for minutes to an hour. Your legs cramp, your nose runs in the cold, but Bill remains a statue, barely seeming to breathe, his eyes fixed on the open ground before you. Just as you are about to whisper a complaint, movement catches your eye at the meadow's far edge. A deer-sized buck with a modest rack of antlers steps cautiously from the trees. It pauses, testing the air, ears swiveling to intercept any sound of danger. Bill remains motionless, not even raising his rifle yet. The deer takes another step into the clearing, then another, gradually relaxing as it detects no threat. Finally, when the animal is fully in the open and presenting its broadside, Bill slowly, smoothly brings the rifle to his shoulder. The movement is so gradual, so fluid, that it seems like a natural part of the forest's gentle swaying in the breeze. The shot, when it comes, shatters the morning silence. The buck drops instantly, struck through the heart. It is a clean kill, one that minimizes suffering and preserves the quality of the meat. "Got him," Bill says simply, rising from his position. You help Bill field dress the deer, removing the internal organs to cool the meat quickly and prevent spoilage. The process is visceral and messy, and while you have grown somewhat accustomed to blood over the past weeks, certain aspects remain challenging. "Save that," Bill instructs as you are about to discard the liver. "Good eatin'." He points to other organs, the heart, the kidneys. In the wilderness, caloric waste is a sin. Together, you carry the dressed carcass back, a job that is both heavy and awkward, a burden that leaves you breathless and sweating despite the cool air. Once there, Bill immediately begins the next phase of processing. "Need to cut it up," he explains, his knife working with surgical precision, practiced efficiency to reduce the deer into manageable portions. "Steaks we'll eat soon," he says, carving out the tenderloins. "The rest goes into pemmican." You watch as he slices the bulk of the muscle into thin ribbons, perhaps a quarter-inch thick. "These need to dry completely," he explains. "No moisture, or it'll spoil." With your help, he constructs a drying rack, a simple frame of green branches elevated about 4 feet off the ground. The meat strips are draped over the crosspieces, none touching, all exposed to the air. "Good day for it," Bill notes, assessing the clear sky. "Sun and wind'll do half the work." The remaining chore is to fire a larger one than usual, maintained to produce a steady drift of smoke that aids preservation and deters insects. You use your new fire-making skills with growing confidence, coaxing a flame on your second attempt with the flint and steel. "What now?" you ask as the last strips are arranged. "Now the fat," Bill says, turning back to the carcass. He harvests the deposits of suet, particularly from around the kidneys and along the spine. "Need to render it." He explains the process as he works. The fat must be diced, then heated slowly to melt without burning. The liquid tallow is then strained to remove any connective tissue or impurities. "If it burns, it spoils," Bill warns, showing you how to manage the low heat under the rendering pot, in a small tin container he carries specifically for this purpose. "Why go to all this trouble?" you ask, watching the fat slowly transform from solid white chunks into transparent gold liquid. "Why not just salt the meat as they do back east?" Bill gives you a look. "See any salt mines around here, or oceans for making sea salt? Out here you use what's available, and what works." The rendering takes hours, demanding constant vigilance. Meanwhile, the meat strips darken and shrink in the sun and smoke. "Good pemmican keeps for years," Bill explains as he carefully strains the tallow through a piece of cloth. "Not months, years. No spoilage, no waste." The concept is remarkable, a nutrient-dense food that remains stable longer than many manufactured goods. In a world without refrigeration, such preservation was the fulcrum between survival and starvation. Lewis and Clark carried it across the continent, you recall from your reading. Bill nods. "Indians taught 'em, taught all of us. Cree made the best. Name comes from their word, Pemmican." While the fat cools and the meat continues to cure, Bill forages nearby, returning with a pouch of dried berries. "Gathered these last fall. Service berries. Some call 'em June berries. Good for pemmican." "You've been carrying dried berries all this time?" you ask, surprised. Bill shrugs. "Never know what you'll need. In winter, it might be the only plant food available. Good against scurvy." The meat strips require a full day and night of drying. Bill rotates them periodically to ensure even exposure. By the next afternoon, they have transformed into nearly black, dehydrated shards that snap rather than bend. "Now the grinding," Bill announces. Lacking a mortar and pestle, you improvise. Bill places the dried meat on a flat rock and uses a rounded stone to pulverize it. It is laborious work. You take turns crushing handful after handful until you have a substantial pile of coarse, reddish-brown powder. "Mix in the berries," Bill instructs. You crush these as well, though not as finely as the meat.
The final step is amalgamation. Bill reheats the rendered fat until liquid, then gradually folds it into the meat berry powder. The ratio appears to be roughly equal parts by volume. Too little fat, it falls apart and spoils. Too much, it's just greasy. The mixture is worked until consistent, a sticky, dense mass that smells strongly of game meat and tallow. Not appetizing by city standards, but out here, its caloric density makes it beautiful. Now we shape it, Bill says, forming portions of the warm mixture into flat cakes the size of your palm. Some make balls, some press it into rawhide containers. Cakes dry best. The pemmican cakes are set on clean branches to cool and solidify. As they harden, Bill fashions small pouches from the deer hide as a quick, field-expedient storage solution. In a proper camp, you'd smoke the hide first, he explains, but these'll do for now. By evening, you have roughly 20 pounds of pemmican packed into hide pouches, each tied tight to keep out air. That's 2 weeks of survival, Bill says with satisfaction, stowing the bulk of the cash in his pack, maybe a month if stretched. To celebrate, dinner is fresh venison steaks. After days of beaver and fish, the meat tastes incredible, rich, tender, and flavorful. Try some, Bill says after the meal, slicing a sliver from one of the pemmican cakes. You accept the offering dubiously. It is hard, waxy, and pungent. Biting into it takes effort, but once in your mouth, the fat melts, releasing the meat's flavors and the tart sweetness of the berries. Different ways to eat it, Bill explains, watching your reaction. Like this is the simplest. Can also fry it or drop it into a stew to thicken. Some mix with flour to make bread if they have. The taste is unusual, but not unpleasant, intensely savory, punctuated by the berries, with a richness that satisfies a primal hunger. Grows on you, Bill notes, especially when it's all that stands between you and starving. That night, as you sit by the fire, Bill seems more talkative than usual, perhaps buoyed by the day's productivity. Winter at 24 was up near the Yellowstone. A bad storm came through. Snowed for days.
6 days straight. Couldn't hunt, couldn't trap, couldn't travel. He takes a sip of pine needle tea. Had pemmican, though. 8 pounds of it. Ate a little each day, melted snow for water, waited it out. When the storm finally broke, the nearest post was 60 miles away. Took me 4 days to reach it through chest-deep snow. Without that pemmican, he trails off. He doesn't need to finish the sentence. The thing about mountain life, Bill continues after a beat, isn't that it's always hard. It's that it turns hard without warning. Blue sky to blizzard in an hour. Plenty to nothing overnight. A man who doesn't prepare dies when his turn comes. Pemmican represents more than food. It is a philosophy. Plan for the catastrophe while the sun shines. Never assume tomorrow will mirror today. Always maintain a reserve for when luck runs dry. How long have you been doing this, you ask, genuinely curious about this reluctant mentor. Bill calculates. First came west in 16 years now. He prods the fire. Different country then. Fewer trappers, more beaver. More Indians, too. Some friendly, some not. Any family back east? A slight tightening around his eyes is the only reaction. Not anymore. You don't press. Out here, many men carry histories they do not share, pasts they have abandoned as surely as they have abandoned civilization. The fire pops, sending sparks drifting toward the canopy of stars. There are more of them here than you ever saw in St. Louis. They seem to crowd one another in the vastness. Did you ever think about going back, you ask after a comfortable silence? Bill doesn't answer immediately. When he does, his voice is quiet. Tried once, 7 years ago. Made it as far as St. Louis. He shakes his head. Too many people, too much noise. Couldn't sleep with walls around me. He feeds a twig to the flames. Lasted 3 weeks before heading back west. Some men just don't fit in towns anymore. You wonder if the same fate awaits you, if this wilderness will alter you so fundamentally that civilization will eventually feel like a prison. The thought is both disturbing and strangely compelling. As if reading your mind, Bill says, "You'll go back. You're not like us, old mountain men. Got too much city in your blood still." How can you tell, you ask?
unsure whether to feel relieved or insulted. Bill almost smiles. You still worry about being clean. It is true. Despite adapting to the rigors of mountain life, you still make an effort to wash when possible, to keep your clothes somewhat presentable. The true mountain men seemed indifferent to such concerns, practical only to the point of hygiene necessary to prevent disease. Nothing wrong with going back, Bill adds, just different paths. The conversation drifts to logistics, plans for tomorrow's trapping, the need to monitor the rising river, the contingency of moving camp to higher ground. As you settle into your bedroll, your mind returns to the pemmican. Such a simple solution to such a critical problem. Indigenous people had perfected it over generations, creating the ultimate. Some men go mad from it, he says, staring into the flames. But not you. A ghost of a smile touches his weathered face. Who says I didn't? It is the closest thing to a joke you have heard from him, and it startles a laugh out of you. Get some sleep, Bill says, assuming the fire watch. Tomorrow we check the traps again. Maybe set some more. You settle into your bedroll, watching the firelight play against the roof of the shelter. The skills are accumulating, one by one. Fire, shelter, navigation, trapping. Slowly, the overwhelming wilderness is becoming slightly less formidable. Not safe, never that, but perhaps survivable. Outside, an owl calls into the darkness. The fire pops, sending a column of sparks upward toward the unseen stars. Your last thought before sleep claims you is surprisingly lucid. Civilization has its comforts, but there is a certain purity to this existence, a clarity that strips away everything but the essentials: food, warmth, shelter, and the knowledge to secure all three. 4 days of steady trapping have passed. The rain has finally moved on, replaced by clear, cold mountain air that feels as though it scrubs your lungs with every breath. Your deadfalls have proven surprisingly effective. 7 beavers have been taken so far, their pelts stretched and drying on frames around the perimeter of your camp. Bill is pleased, though he expresses it only through a slight reduction in his criticism. Dawn today brings something new, a different kind of urgency in Bill's movements as he scans the sky. What is it, you ask, emerging from the half-faced shelter? You are sleeping better each night. Now your body is finally adapting to the hard ground. Weather's changing, Bill says, studying the eastern horizon. Warm spell coming. You glance at the frost-covered ground dubiously. Doesn't feel warm. Will be, 2-3 days. Snow will melt in the high country. River will rise again. Bill turns to you. Need to prepare. For what? Hunger. The blunt answer catches you off guard. You've been eating reasonably well. Beaver meat, a few trout, even a grouse Bill snared yesterday. The desperate starvation of your first days feels like a distant memory. We have food, you point out. Bill shakes his head. Fresh meat spoils fast in warm weather, and game moves when water rises. Might be days with nothing to hunt. He begins gathering equipment, his knife, the small axe, and a canvas bag. Today we make insurance, Pemmican. The word is familiar from books you've read on Western exploration. Lewis and Clark carried it. The voyageurs lived on it for months. But you have never seen it made, let alone tasted it. First, we need meat, lots of it. Bill shoulders his rifle. Deer would be best. You follow him into the forest, moving quietly as he has taught you. The morning is bright, sunlight filtering through the pine boughs, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. Birds call from the canopy, their songs more numerous and varied than in previous days, another harbinger of the coming shift in weather. Bill leads you to a meadow about a mile from camp. Frost still clings to the grass, glittering in the early light. At the meadow's edge, he drops into a crouch, motioning for you to do the same. Wheat, he whispers, settling against a fallen log with his rifle across his knees. The wait stretches from minutes to an hour. Your legs cramp, your nose runs in the cold, but Bill remains a statue, barely seeming to breathe, his eyes fixed on the open ground. Just as you are about to whisper a complaint, movement catches your eye at the far edge of the meadow. A deer-sized buck with a modest rack of antlers steps cautiously from the trees. It pauses, testing the air,
ears swiveling to intercept any sign of danger. Bill remains motionless. The deer takes another step into the clearing, then another, gradually relaxing as it detects no threat. Finally, when the animal is fully exposed,
Broadside, Bill slowly, smoothly brings the rifle to his shoulder. The movement is so gradual, it seems like a natural part of the forest's gentle swaying. The shot shatters the morning silence. The buck drops instantly, struck through the heart, a clean kill that minimizes suffering and preserves the meat. "Got him," Bill says simply, rising. You help Bill field dress the deer, removing the internal organs to cool the meat quickly. The process is visceral and messy, and while you have grown accustomed to blood over the past weeks, certain aspects remain challenging. "Save that," Bill instructs as you are about to discard the liver. "Good eating." He points to the heart and kidneys. In the wilderness, caloric waste is a sin. Together you carry the dressed carcass back, a heavy, awkward burden that leaves you breathless. Once there, Bill immediately begins the next phase. "Need to cut it up," he explains, his knife working with surgical precision. "Steaks we'll eat soon. The rest goes into pemmican." You watch as he slices the bulk of the muscle into thin ribbons, perhaps a quarter-inch thick. "These need to dry completely," he explains. "No moisture or it'll spoil." With your help, he constructs a drying rack, a simple frame of green branches elevated off the ground. The meat strips are draped over the crosspieces, exposed to the air. "Good day for it," Bill notes. "Sun and wind will do half the work." The remaining chore is to fire a larger one than usual, maintained to produce a steady drift of smoke that aids preservation and deters insects. You use your new fire-making skills with growing confidence, coaxing a flame on your second attempt. "What now?" you ask. "Now the fat," Bill says, harvesting the deposits of suet from the carcass. "Need to render it." He explains the process as he works. The fat must be diced, then heated slowly to melt without burning. The liquid tallow is then strained. If it burns, it spoils, Bill warns, showing you how to manage the low heat under the rendering pot. "Why go to all this trouble?" you ask, watching the fat transform into liquid gold. "Why not just salt the meat?" Bill gives you a look. "See any salt mines around here? Out here you use what's available." The rendering takes hours. Meanwhile, the meat strips darken and shrink in the sun and smoke. "Good pemmican keeps for years," Bill explains. "Not months, years. No spoilage, no waste." The concept is remarkable, a nutrient-dense food stable enough to outlast civilizations. In a world without refrigeration, this was the fulcrum between survival and starvation. Lewis and Clark carried it, you recall. Bill nods. Indians taught them. Cree made the best. Name comes from their word, pemmican. While the fat cools, Bill forages nearby, returning with a pouch of dried berries. Service berries, some call them June berries, good against scurvy. The meat requires a full day and night of drying. By the next afternoon, the strips have transformed into nearly black, dehydrated shards that snap rather than bend. "Now the grinding," Bill announces. Lacking a mortar and pestle, you improvise, using stones to pulverize the dried meat into a coarse, reddish-brown powder. "Mix in the berries," Bill instructs. The final step is amalgamation. Bill reheats the rendered fat and folds it into the meat berry powder. The ratio appears to be roughly equal parts by volume. "Too little fat, it falls apart," Bill explains. "Too much, it's just greasy." The mixture is worked into a sticky, dense mass. Not appetizing by city standards, but out here, its caloric density makes it beautiful. "Now we shape it," Bill says, forming the warm mixture into flat cakes. These are set to cool, then packed into improvised hide pouches. "That's 2 weeks of survival," Bill says with satisfaction, "maybe a month if stretched." To celebrate, dinner is fresh venison steaks. After days of beaver and fish, the meat tastes incredible. "Try some," Bill says later, slicing a sliver from a pemmican cake. You accept it dubiously. It is hard and waxy, but as the fat melts in your mouth, it releases the savory depth of the meat and the tart sweetness of the berries. It is intense, rich, and primal. Grows on you, Bill notes, especially when it's all that stands between you and starving. That night, Bill seems more talkative than usual. Winter of 24, he begins, up near the Yellowstone. Bad storm, snowed for 6 days, couldn't hunt. Had pemmican, though, 8 pounds of it, melted snow for water, waited it out. When the storm finally broke, the nearest post was 60 miles away. Took me 4 days to reach it through chest-deep snow. Without that pemmican, he trails off. The thing about mountain life, he continues, isn't that it's always hard, it's that it turns hard without warning. Blue sky to blizzard in an hour, plenty to nothing overnight. A man who doesn't prepare dies when his turn comes. Pemmican is more than food. It is a philosophy. Plan for the catastrophe while the sun shines. Always maintain a reserve for when luck runs dry. How long have you been doing this, you ask? First came west in 15, he calculates. 16 years now. Different country then. Fewer trappers, more beaver. Any family back east? A tightening around his eyes. Not anymore. You don't press. Out here, many men carry histories they do not share. Did you ever think about going back, you ask later? Tried once, 7 years ago. Made it as far as St. Louis. He shakes his head. Too many people, too much noise. Couldn't sleep with walls around me. Lasted 3 weeks before heading back west. You wonder if the same fate awaits you, if this wilderness will alter you so fundamentally that civilization will eventually feel like a prison. You'll go back, Bill says, reading your mind. You're not like us. Got too much city in your blood still. How can you tell? Bill almost smiles. You still worry about being clean. It is true. You still cling to hygiene as a tether to your former self. Nothing wrong with going back, Bill adds, just different paths. 3 days later, Bill's prediction holds. A warm front sweeps in, and the river rises, swelling with debris. The trapping dies. The beavers have gone to ground. No trapping today, you ask? Bill shakes his head. Meat's running low. Time to hunt. What's the plan? First, we read the land, Bill says. Need to know what's moving out there. Trapping is about static locations. Hunting is about kinetic movement. You follow Bill away from the river to a game trail, a narrow artery worn through the underbrush. Stop, Bill says, kneeling. Look here, what do you see? You study the florist floor. Initially, nothing. Then your eyes adjust. Tracks. Deer? Bill nods. 2 of them, doe and a yearling. Moving which way? That way, you point tentatively. Good. How long ago? You're stumped. No idea. Bill points to the edge of a print. See how the soil is crumbled here? Not smooth. Still settling. Recent. Within the hour. As you move along,
Bill provides a seminar on tracking. He points out a bent twig indicating the animal's height, a tuft of hair on a thorn bush, and droppings that reveal diet and timing. Fresh, he says, testing the scat. Still warm. They're close. He shows you the browse lines, vegetation nipped off at distinctive angles. He points out rub marks on trees and slight depressions where deer have bedded. Thinking like a deer yet? Bill asks. Not really, you admit. Need to. Hunter doesn't just follow tracks, becomes the animal, knows its hunger, its fears. The trail leads toward a small clearing. Bill drops to a crouch. Wind's in our favor. They won't smell us. You creep forward. There they are, doe and yearling, grazing on fresh spring growth. Bill raises his rifle, then lowers it. Your shot, he says quietly. It is a test. After weeks of instruction, the burden of provision shifts to you. You raise your rifle, mimicking Bill's fluid motion. The doe presents her broadside, ideal geometry for a kill. Behind the shoulder, heart and lungs. Breathe, squeeze. The rifle cracks. The doe drops immediately. The yearling vanishes into the timber before you can cycle the action. Good, Bill says. The approval warms you more than it should. Field dressing is efficient work now. Too much to carry whole, Bill decides.
We'll butcher here, take what we need. Without preservation supplies, you can only take what you can consume or cure quickly. The rest is a tithe to the forest's scavengers. Nothing's truly wasted out here, Bill notes. Circle keeps turning. On the return trek, Bill diverts to a different route. Learning opportunity, he says cryptically. Half a mile later, he stops, studying the ground. Different tracks. What made these? You examine the prints. Larger, round, distinct toes. Bear, you guess? Remembering the grizzly? Bill shakes his head. Look closer. No claw marks. Bears leave claw prints. You look again. He is right. Toes, but no claws. Mountain lion, Bill says. Cat retracts its claws when walking, only extends them for killing. A chill runs through you. Recent? Day or two old, Bill assesses. Moving that way. He points away from the camp. Territory overlaps. Their prey is our prey. As you walk, the education continues. Disturbed ground indicates turkeys scratching for insects. Saplings with tops eaten clean betray the passage of elk. Every sign is a sentence in a story written on the land. Back at camp, you hang the meat in the smoke. As the steaks sizzle, Bill cleans his knife. Tracking's not just for hunting, it's for survival. Knowing what's around you, what's been through, what might be coming. He explains that scenarios dictate the technique. In winter, tracks are obvious but fleeting. In dry conditions, dust and bent grass becomes the readable signs. In forests, broken twigs and disturbed leaf litter tell the story. A man who can't read a sign is blind out here, Bill says. Might as well walk off a cliff. After a meal of venison as delicious as you remembered, Bill makes an unusual suggestion. Tomorrow, you track me. What? The proposal catches you off guard. I'll leave camp at dawn, get an hour head start. You follow. Let's see what you've learned. The challenge is both exciting and intimidating. Bill possesses decades of experience and knows every trick to mask his trail. You have a few weeks of basic instruction and still miss obvious signs. What if I can't find you? Then you learn a valuable lesson, Bill answers, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Don't get separated from those who know more than you. That night, sleep comes slowly. Your mind is busy cataloging the day's lessons, preparing for the test. When you finally drift off, you dream of following invisible trails, reading stories written in broken twigs. Dawn arrives with a thin mist clinging to the forest floor. As promised, Bill is gone when you wake, his bedroll empty, his pack missing. The game has begun. You prepare quickly, eating a ration of pemmican and filling your water skin. Your rifle, as always, is at hand. With a deep breath to center yourself, you begin. The first signs are easy, too easy. Obvious boot prints leading from camp toward the river. This is suspicious. Bill wouldn't leave such a billboard unless it was a false trail. He has doubled back somewhere. You circle the camp perimeter, scanning for subtle disturbances. There is a slight discoloration on a tree trunk where someone brushed against it, transferring skin oils. Beyond it, a nearly imperceptible compression in the leaf litter. You follow this subtler trail, moving slowly. Tracking, you realize, is a form of active meditation. It requires total presence. Your awareness narrows to the immediate, the placement of leaves, the angle of broken twigs, the minute interruptions in nature's pattern. An hour passes. Sometimes you lose the trail completely, forcing you to circle in widening loops until you recover the thread. Other times, the sign is surprisingly clear, as if he is testing specific observational skills. The trail leads up a gentle slope covered in pine. Here, on the needle-carpeted ground, tracking becomes difficult. Needles don't hold distinct prints, but they show disturbance patterns, color shifts where the underside of the needle has been exposed. Near the ridgetop, the trail simply vanishes. You circle, search, and examine every stick and stone. Nothing. It is as if Bill evaporated. Thinking like a deer yet? Bill's voice comes from directly behind you. You spin, startled. He is standing 10 feet away, leaning against a tree, watching you with that same faint amusement. How long have you been there? About 20 minutes. Watched you circle the same area 5 times. Where did you go? The trail just stopped. Bill points to a fallen log nearby. Walked on that for 50 yards, then stepped onto the rocks. No prints either way. Basic counter-tracking using hard surfaces. You should have thought of that. But you found me this far, Bill acknowledges. Not bad for a greenhorn. Wouldn't have managed that in your first week out. Again, the warm glow of minimal praise. You're starting to understand the mountain man economy of approval, given rarely, valued highly. How would you track someone who knows all these tricks? Someone who walks on logs and rocks? Bill considers. Look for what they can't control. Everyone disturbs the world as they pass through it. Birds flush, dew brushes off the grass, spider webs break. Nature has patterns. People interrupt them. On the return trek, Bill diverts to a different route. Learning opportunity, he says cryptically. Half a mile later, he stops, studying the ground. Different tracks. What made these? You examine the prints. Larger, round, distinct toes. Bear, you guess? Remembering the grizzly? Bill shakes his head. Look closer. No claw marks. Bears leave claw prints. You look again. He is right. Toes, but no claws. Mountain lion, Bill says. Cat retracts its claws when walking, only extends them for killing. A chill runs through you. Recent? Day or 2 old, Bill assesses. Moving that way, he points away from the camp. Territory overlaps. Their prey is our prey. As you walk, the education continues. Disturbed ground indicates turkeys scratching for insects. Saplings with tops eaten clean betray the passage of elk. Every sign is a sentence in a story written on the land.
Are predictable. People aren't. Back at camp by midday, you help Bill secure the remaining deer meat and check the drying of the beaver pelts. The work has become routine, your hands remembering the motions without conscious thought. Making progress, Bill observes, examining a pelt you stretched. Might make a trapper of you yet. High praise, you reply with a smile. Bill shrugs. Truth is truth. As evening approaches, bringing cooler air down from the high country, you sit by the fire and reflect on the weeks since joining Bill. You have learned skills, fire making, tracking, trapping, but also a new way of seeing. The forest, once a chaotic, threatening void, now reveals its systems to your educated eye. You notice the slight movement of animals, the changing bird song marking the time of day, the shift in the wind carrying information. Bill, you say after a comfortable silence, do you ever miss anything about civilization? He considers the question longer than you expected. Books, he finally answers. Had some schooling as a boy, liked reading, lucky to see a newspaper once a year at the rendezvous. The answer surprises you. Of all the comforts of town life, books seem an unexpected choice for a man like Bill. What did you like to read? History mostly, stories of other times, other places. A log shifts, sending a geyser of sparks toward the canopy. Ironic, I suppose, Bill muses. Spent my life making the kind of history nobody will ever write down. The observation strikes you as profoundly true. The mountain men were creating history daily, pushing into unmapped territories, establishing diplomacy with indigenous nations, and learning the land in ways no outsider ever had. Yet their stories were ephemeral, passing only through oral tradition, destined to die when the last campfire burned out. Someone should write it down, you suggest, before it's lost. Bill glances at you. Maybe that'll be your job when you go back east. Tell them what it was really like out here, not the romantic nonsense they print in those penny dreadfuls. The thought takes root. You have been keeping mental notes all along, observing not just the mechanics of survival, but also the philosophy and worldview that allow men like Bill to thrive where others perish. As darkness settles, the fire becomes an island of light in the vast ocean of wilderness.
Overhead, the stars appear in their thousands, a brilliant, crowded dusting that makes the St. Louis sky seem impoverished. "Get some sleep," Bill says, settling onto his bedroll. "Tomorrow we check the trap line again. River's dropping. Beaver might be moving more freely now." You lie back. The ground is no longer uncomfortable to your adapted body. The fire pops. An owl calls. These sounds have become familiar, almost comforting. Your last thought before sleep claims you is about tracks, not just those left by animals, but the invisible impressions people leave on one another. Bill is certainly leaving his mark on you, not just by teaching you how to survive, but by showing you how to read the world more deeply, to see the connections most miss entirely. The most important tracking lesson is learning to see what is really there, not what you expect or hope or fear, but what actually exists, to observe without judgment. As consciousness fades, you wonder what tracks you might be leaving behind, and whether, like the mountain men before you, your trail will eventually fade back into the landscape, leaving no trace that you were ever here at all. Time in the wilderness follows a different cadence. Days blend together, marked not by clocks, but by the arc of the sun, the phases of the moon, the gradual shifting of seasons. 6 weeks have passed since you first met Bill. 6 weeks of daily lessons in survival, in reading the land, in becoming something other than the city man who first ventured west. The morning air carries the scent of early summer. The brutal cold of spring has yielded to pleasant days and cool nights. The forest has transformed. Dense green foliage where once bare branches stood, wildflowers dotting meadows, berries forming on bushes. You sit outside the half-faced shelter that has been home for nearly a month, carefully packing the beaver pelts that represent your tenure in the mountains. 26 prime pelts, each properly stretched, dried, and folded fur side in. Not the 40 Bill had mentioned as ideal, but respectable, given the shortened season and improvised methods. Worth about $100, Bill assesses, watching you work. Your share would be $30, plus whatever the company pays you. $30, equivalent to several months of wages back east. Not the fortune you dreamed of, but substantial nonetheless, and purchased at a cost far beyond money, in sweat, discomfort, fear, and hard-won knowledge. "We head out tomorrow," Bill says, checking his rifle with a meticulous care that has become as natural as breathing. 2 days to reach the green if the weather holds. Rendezvous, the legendary gathering of mountain men, traders, Indians, and company agents, marked the end of the trapping season. After weeks with no human contact beyond Bill, the prospect of seeing other people feels almost surreal. "Will it be overwhelming?" you ask, thinking of how accustomed you've become to silence. Bill seems to understand. "First day always is, then you remember how it works." You have changed in ways that are difficult to articulate. Your body is harder, leaner, and tougher from exertion. Your hands bear calluses and scars. Your face, glimpsed in still water, appears weathered, the beard full. But the bigger changes are internal. Your senses have sharpened. You notice sounds and smells that would have escaped you 6 weeks ago. Your patience has expanded. What once seemed a chaotic wilderness now reveals its systems to your educated eye. "Last chance to get everything in order," Bill says, nodding towards your belongings. "Once we leave, we don't come back." Breaking camp is bittersweet. This rough shelter, this small clearing, has become a home. For all its dangers, it represents a place where you grew. The afternoon is spent in methodical preparation, packing the precious pelts, selecting essential tools, and deciding what must be abandoned. Space and weight are a premium. "What about the shelter?" you ask. "Leave it. Might serve someone else in need, or return to the forest in time." The philosophy runs deep. Take what you need, leave what you don't, and make your impact temporary. No permanent claim on the land. That evening, your last in this camp, Bill seems usually reflective. Perhaps the impending transition to the relative civilization of rendezvous prompts his openness. "First season's the hardest," he says, staring into the fire.
Either breaks a man or remakes him. Which happened to me, you ask. Bill studies you across the flames. Still being remade. Process takes time. You think about the man who left St. Louis full of romantic notions, eager for adventure, completely unprepared. That version of yourself seems impossibly naive now, almost a stranger. Will I ever see the world the same way again? You wonder aloud. Bill shakes his head slowly. Can't step in the same river twice. Eyes open, stays open. You sleep restlessly that night, your mind cycling through memories of the past, moments of fear and triumph, discovery and disappointment. The forest sounds that once seemed threatening now form a familiar symphony. Dawn comes with a heavy mist, turning the forest ethereal. You rise before Bill for once, stoking the fire and preparing a simple breakfast of the last venison. The act feels significant, a small ceremony closing this chapter. Bill emerges, noting your earliness with a raised eyebrow, but says nothing. Together you eat in companionable silence. Time, Bill finally says, extinguishing the fire with careful thoroughness. The packs are heavy with pelts, Bill's with tools. Your rifle remains in your hands. With one last look at the camp, you follow Bill into the forest, heading west toward the Green River. The journey begins in silence. Around midday, you cross the drainage basin into new territory. The landscape shifts, different rock formations, unfamiliar game trails. Bill navigates with confidence, pointing out landmarks. Ridge there marks the divide, he explains. Cross that, we're in Green River country. The walking is harder than expected. By late afternoon, your shoulders ache. Bill selects a campsite near a small creek. Rest here tonight, push over the divide tomorrow. The camp is minimal shelter, just a fire. You gather wood automatically, your mind wandering. Bill, you say as night falls, do you ever wonder if this life will disappear, if there will come a time when no one remembers how to do what you do? He pokes at the fire. All things end, he says simply. Beaver is getting trapped out. Companies are pushing west, settlers following. Time's coming when there won't be room for men who need empty spaces. The acknowledgement holds a quiet sadness. Bill represents not just a profession, but a way of life that can only exist in untamed places. That's why I agreed to show you, he continues after a long silence. Not just so you wouldn't die, but so someone would remember how it was done, how it felt. The real story, not the tall tales they'll tell later. You are struck by the unexpected trust. The gruff mentor has been evaluating you all along, deciding if you were worthy of carrying his legacy. I'll remember, and I'll tell it true. A nod is his only response, but it feels significant to you. Morning brings clear skies and a brutal climb. The air thins as you ascend. By midday, you reach the pass. Bill stops, allowing you to take in the view. Before you stretches the vast drainage of the Green River, miles of forest, meadow, and rock unfolding toward the horizon. A wilderness so vast, it seems impossible it could ever be tamed. Down there, Bill says, pointing to a distant valley. That's where they'll gather. 100, maybe 200 men. Indians, too. Biggest collection of scoundrels, heroes, liars, and legends you'll ever see. The descent is easier physically, but demands careful footing. By late afternoon, you drop back into the thicker forest of the lower elevations, aspen and lush undergrowth. Bill's pace quickens, a subtle sign of anticipation. Even the most solitary man values the rendezvous, stories, the news, the rough camaraderie. Camp that night is casual. The isolation is ending. Tomorrow brings chaos. What should I expect? You ask as the stars emerge. Bill considers. Noise, trading, drinking, stories bigger than the mountains, true, most not. He adds a stick to the fire. Company men in clean clothes looking down their noses at the men who make them rich. Indians watching it all, trading furs and horses, keeping their own counsel. Sounds overwhelming, you observe. It is, Bill acknowledges. First day, just watch. Get your bearings. Don't believe half of what you hear. Don't drink what they offer unless you've seen where it came from. Don't gamble unless you can afford to lose. Practical advice, as always. You wonder how you will appear to them. No longer a greenhorn, but not quite a veteran, something in between. What will you do after rendezvous, you ask? Bill shrugs. Resupply. Maybe head north toward the Yellowstone, maybe west to the Snake. Depends on the news. Beaver populations, tribal movements. Always moving, you confirm. Stay too long in one place, you trap it out, or someone decides it's their territory, or you get too comfortable and make mistakes. The impermanence strikes you anew. No fixed home, no community, just seasonal rhythms and constant calculation. Freedom is purchased at the price of stability. Sleep comes easily despite the anticipation. Weeks of exertion have taught your body to seize rest when available to store energy for the challenges ahead. You wake to Bill's voice, unusually urgent. Up, now. The tone brings you instantly alert, your hand reaching for your rifle before you are fully conscious. Dawn has barely broken, the forest is still shadowed and gray. What is it? You whisper, scanning for danger. Bill nods toward the edge of our small camp. We have company. In the dim light, you make out 3 figures standing motionless among the trees. Indians, their faces painted for war, each armed with a mixture of traditional weapons and trade rifles. Your heart hammers against your ribs, but you follow Bill's lead, making no sudden movements. You keep your rifle ready, but not aimed directly at the visitors. Crow, Bill says quietly. War party, but a small one, probably looking for Blackfeet, not us. One of the warriors steps forward and speaks in his own language. Bill listens, then responds with a mixture of words and hands, the trade language of the frontier that bridged tribal tongues. The exchange continues briefly. Then Bill reaches slowly into his pack and removes a small pouch of tobacco, one of his few luxury items, carefully rationed throughout your time in the mountains. Gift, he explains to you as he offers it to the lead warrior. Shows respect, shows we're not enemies. The warrior accepts the tobacco with dignity, saying something that makes the other 2 nod in agreement. They're warning us, Bill translates. Blackfeet war party, maybe a dozen braves, crossed north of here 2 days ago, heading for rendezvous, planning to steal horses.
To warn the others, you say. Bill nods, exchanging a few more words and signs with the Crow warriors. They're continuing south. We go west as fast as we can. Might beat the Blackfeet there if we push hard. The Crow warriors disappear into the forest as silently as they appeared, leaving you and Bill to hurriedly break camp. The encounter has demonstrated yet another aspect of wilderness survival, the complex human element, the diplomacy required to navigate relationships with various tribal groups. The day's journey takes on new urgency. Bill sets a pace that challenges your endurance, stopping only briefly for water and a few bites of pemmican. The direct threat of a Blackfeet war party transforms the landscape around you. Every shadow might hide watchers, every sound could signal danger. By mid-afternoon, when you would normally be thinking about making camp, Bill pushes onward. Smoke ahead, he says, pointing to a barely visible haze in the distant sky. Rendezvous fires. We keep moving. Your legs ache, your shoulders burn from the heavy pack, but you match Bill's relentless pace. The knowledge you carry could prevent deaths, a responsibility that overrides personal discomfort. As dusk approaches, you catch glimpses through the trees of a large clearing beside a river, the rendezvous. Fires are visible now, dozens of them dotting the gathering space. The distant sound of voices carries on the evening, the first human voices besides Bill you have heard in months. You expect to head directly into the encampment, but Bill veers slightly, approaching from an angle that keeps you in the tree line longer. Caution, he explains simply. Never rush into any situation, even one that seems safe. From the forest edge, you survey the scene. Tents and temporary shelters spread across the clearing. Men gather in clusters around fires. Horses graze in a makeshift corral. Indian tipis stand slightly separate from the main camp, their distinctive shapes silhouetted against the darkening sky. A lot of people, you observe, suddenly aware of how accustomed you've become to solitude. 150, maybe more, Bill estimates. Good turnout this year. Before stepping into the open, Bill takes a moment to scan the perimeter. No extra guards posted, he notes with disapproval.
News of Blackfeet hasn't reached them yet. You follow Bill into the camp, immediately struck by the sensory overload after weeks in the quiet forest. Voices call out in English, French, Spanish, and various native languages. The smells of cooking food, unwashed bodies, horses, and wood smoke create a pungent mixture. Movement everywhere draws your eye, a stark contrast to the subtle, slow rhythms of the wilderness. Several men notice Bill and call out greetings or raise their hands in recognition. He acknowledges them with nods, but moves purposefully toward a larger tent at the camp's center, clearly seeking someone specific. A well-dressed man emerges from the tent, clean-shaven, wearing a coat despite the warm evening. The company agent, you realize, is the representative of the fur trading company that financed most of these mountain men's expeditions. Harrison, Bill addresses him without preamble. Blackfeet war party moving this way. Dozen braves at least. Crow scouts spotted them 2 days ago north of here. The agent's expression shifts from initial irritation at the interruption to focused concern. You're certain? Crow have no reason to lie about Blackfeet. Need to post guards, warn the men, secure the horses. Harrison nods, immediately turning to give orders to several nearby men. The camp's casual atmosphere transforms as the news spreads. Men checking weapons, moving horses closer to the main encampment, organizing watch rotations. You follow Bill as he makes his way to a less crowded section of the camp, finally dropping his pack with a grateful sigh. Now we wait, he says, settling onto a fallen log. Warning's been given, preparations made. Rest is up to them. The reaction to the warning demonstrates the respect Bill commands among these men. Despite his preference for solitude, his word carries weight earned through years of surviving what many others didn't. As night fully descends, the rendezvous takes on a different character. Fires blaze higher, voices grow louder with drink and camaraderie. Stories flow as freely as the whiskey that many trappers save their entire season's earnings to purchase. You sit quietly beside Bill, observing the scene with the heightened awareness you've developed in the wilderness. The gathered mountain men represent a unique brotherhood, individuals who choose a life of extreme hardship and danger, who carry the knowledge of survival as their most precious possession. Like coming back to a village you visit once a year, Bill observes, watching the interactions around you. Same faces missing each time, new ones that probably won't return, a few that somehow keep breathing year after year. The understanding strikes you profoundly. These annual gatherings mark not just successful seasons, but survival itself. Each man here has faced countless opportunities to die and has overcome them through skill, knowledge, or simple luck. As the night deepens, you are approached by several trappers curious about the newcomer traveling with the notoriously solitary Bill. Their questions are direct, their assessment of your worth transparent in their weathered faces. You answer honestly, neither exaggerating your accomplishments nor hiding your status as a relative beginner. One grizzled trapper slaps your shoulder after hearing of your river crossing in the bullboat. Still breathing after that? Bill must have taught you something useful. The comment, delivered with rough humor, carries unexpected weight. You have survived, not just existed, but learned to live in a place that kills the unprepared with indifferent ease. The realization settles into your bones. Quiet pride, distinct from arrogance. Later, as many trappers succumb to exhaustion or whiskey, you sit with Bill, away from the main fires, watching the stars wheel overhead. What will you do now? Bill asks, surprising you with the question. After rendezvous? Back to St. Louis with your share of the pelts? Or another season in the mountains? The question has been forming in your own mind for weeks. The original plan was a single season to experience the wilderness before returning to civilization. Longer feels adequate. You have barely scratched the surface of what there is to learn, to understand about this life. I'm thinking I might stay, find a partner for the next season, keep learning. Bill nods, neither approving nor disapproving, simply acknowledging your choice. Mountains change a man, he says, after a while. Some can't go back to town life, too confining. Too many rules that don't matter. Is that what happened to you? A ghost of a smile touches his weathered face. Partly just found where I belonged. Same as yours.
Doing now? The conversation drifts into comfortable silence. Around you, the rendezvous camp gradually quiets as even the most determined revelers seek sleep. Guards patrol the perimeter, alert for the Blackfeet threat that may or may not materialize. As you settle onto your bedroll under the open sky, too many years in the mountains have left Bill with a distaste for tents. You reflect on the journey that brought you here, not just the physical travel from St. Louis to this remote river valley, but the internal passage from who you were to who you are becoming. The skills you have learned, trapping, navigation, tracking, fire making, shelter building, pemmican preparation, represent more than mere techniques for staying alive. They form a philosophy, a way of seeing and being in the world that is increasingly rare, even in this early period of American expansion. Self-reliance balanced with necessary community, taking what is needed without excess, reading the land's patterns rather than imposing upon them, adapting to conditions rather than trying to control them, living with danger as a constant companion rather than an unexpected visitor. These mountain men, with their rough ways and remarkable skills, are already becoming anachronisms in their own time. The wilderness they navigate will soon feel the advancing pressure of settlement, of different values and relationships with the land. But for now, in this moment, you have glimpsed a way of life that few will ever experience. You have begun to understand what it takes to survive, not just physically, but spiritually, in places where humans are not the dominant species, where nature's rules supersede human desires and assumptions. Bill shifts on his bedroll nearby, already falling into the light, alert sleep of those who know danger might come at any moment. A man who has found his place in the world, however temporary and shifting that place might be. As sleep approaches, you realize that the most valuable thing Bill has taught you isn't any specific technique or skill, but a different way of being, present, aware, connected to the immediate reality of your surroundings. Civilization encourages distraction, abstraction, and removal from the physical world. The wilderness demands presence, attention, and direct engagement with what is. The stars overhead seem impossibly bright, unbounded by city lights or closed rooms. The night air carries the scent of pine, wood smoke, and river water. Distant sounds of the forest blend with the quiet movements of the camp. Your body, tired but stronger than it has ever been, settles into the ground beneath you. This moment, like all moments in the wilderness, is both fleeting and eternal, part of cycles that long preceded human presence and will continue long after. Your participation in these cycles and your growing understanding of their patterns and meanings connect you to something larger than yourself. As consciousness fades, one final thought surfaces. Perhaps the most essential survival skill of all is the ability to truly see the world as it is, not as you wish or fear it to be, to read its signs accurately, to respond appropriately, to find your place within its systems rather than attempting to stand apart from them. The mountain men knew this. Their lives depended on this clear-eyed engagement with reality. And now, in some small measure, so do you. Sleep comes gently, carrying you away like a leaf on a river current, flowing through dreams of forests and mountains, of tracking unseen animals through fresh snow, of fire springing from stone and steel, of skills that kept men alive in a world both beautiful and unforgiving. A world that, like the mountain men themselves, is already beginning to fade into history, leaving behind only traces for those who know how to read them.